I had been on the phone with the same customer for 38 minutes when my entire life changed and I didn't notice. The fluorescent strip light overhead flickered every 12 seconds like a dying moth trying to attract attention. It had been in its rhythm for the past 4 weeks, and I'd trained myself not to notice it any more than I noticed my own heartbeat. The headset was on its 3rd year, foam compressed flat against the cartilage of my left ear, and the slight discomfort had become another background noise. My work phone buzzed every 12-30 seconds, depending on whether my supervisor was pacing nearby or not. I'd learned to ignore it too, except for when the glow from a new notification pierced through the cracks in my cube walls. 73 unreads since lunch. No time like the present. Hello, thank you for calling Stellable Support. How can I help you today? My voice was as automatic as the light's flicker. It was 38 minutes into the call with the customer when I realized he wasn't going to let me hang up anytime soon. He had that tone, the one that said he already knew the answer, but just wanted to be angry at someone. I've been a customer for 6 years, and this is honestly the worst service I've ever received. The post-call alert chimed on my computer, a full 60 seconds of blissful silence before the next call came through. I logged out of the queue, dropped my work phone into my bag, and stood up. The laminate desk was bare, except for a coffee mug ring and 3 mustard yellow Office Depot post-it notes. Each one had a name scribbled on it in my neat handwriting, a reminder of calls I needed to follow up on later. I stepped out onto the street outside the office. The cold air hit me, the late autumn breeze slicing through my coat. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the wet pavement. I could see my breath misting in front of me with each exhale, and the chill began to bite at my cheeks. I stuffed my hands into my pockets, the fabric of my gloves rubbing against my skin. My footsteps echoed as I walked, the sound bouncing off the concrete buildings that lined the street. The city lights started to flicker on one by one, their yellow glow casting a warm invitation from within the cold night air. 5 blocks until the train station, just like every other day. My bag buzzed against my hip, and I felt the vibration more than I heard it. I didn't look at my phone. I knew what it was, another notification, another problem for someone else to dump in my lap. I could feel the tension building between my shoulders with each buzz, but I kept walking. The train station was a haven of warmth and noise. The rush of people heading home after work created a low hum that filled the air. I climbed onto the half-empty commuter train, the doors sliding shut behind me with a soft pneumatic hiss. I slouched into a window seat by the door, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. Across the aisle sat a woman in a crisp red coat, her glasses perched on her nose as she flipped through a stack of papers in her lap. She looked up briefly as I sat down, her eyes meeting mine before she went back to her work. The train lurched into motion, and I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look at it, not yet. I could feel it vibrating on my thigh, a rhythmic pulse that matched the clacking of the train's wheels on the tracks. I closed my eyes, letting the motion and the noise wash over me. Just for now, just until the train reached my stop. I kept my eyes closed, letting the rhythm of the train lull me into a state halfway between wakefulness and sleep. Then, suddenly, something changed. A warm glow seeped into my consciousness, pulling me back from the edge of unconsciousness. I opened my eyes, blinking against the sudden brightness. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Floating in front of me, superimposed over the reflection of my own face on the train window, were words. Glowing, pulsing words. I blinked again, harder this time, rubbing the heel of my hand against my eyes. But the words remained, stubborn and steady. System initialized. Notification detected. +1 SDR. I sat frozen, staring at these strange intruders in my vision. My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat echoing in my ears. I felt a surge of panic, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to react. Across the aisle, the woman with the papers continued her rhythmic flipping, oblivious to the spectacle unfolding before me. She didn't see it. This wasn't something she could see. It was happening to me. Whatever this was, it was mine alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. a real-world sound, jarring and familiar, pulling me back from the shock of the glowing words. I felt a fresh wave of notifications wash over me. 2, 3, 4. Each one brought a new overlay, each one with its own stat update. +1 dex. +1 con. +2 int, encrypted. My heart pounded harder. This couldn't be happening, could it? I kept my hands firmly in my lap, gripping the edge of my seat to stop myself from reaching for my phone. I didn't want to acknowledge this. Not yet. The train began to slow, the familiar lurch signaling our approach to my stop. I sat up straighter, breaking out of my paralyzed stupor. The overlays remained, floating steadily in my vision as I stood and gathered my things. I stepped off the train onto the platform, each step feeling heavier than the last. The cold air nipped at me as I stepped off the train, my vision still a mess of stat overlays. 11 more notifications buzzed in as I walked the 4 blocks to my apartment building, each one triggering another overlay. By the time I reached the entrance, I was silently counting them like a game. The stairs were always a challenge, but tonight they felt different. Halfway up, I realized I wasn't gasping for breath like usual. 15 years of climbing these stairs, and this was the first time my lungs didn't burn. Something was happening, something real. My apartment was dimly lit by the bedside lamp in the living room. I set my bag on the kitchen counter and finally looked at my work phone. The lock screen showed 156 unread notifications, a familiar number that now sent a shiver down my spine. Notification received. +1 SDR. SDR 12. I stared at my phone, watching the numbers tick up as more notifications came in while I waited for my dinner to heat up. The microwave hummed, and so did my vision with every stat increase. +1 dex. +1 int. +1 con. +2 SDR, encrypted. By the time the microwave beeped, my strength had climbed to 27. I pulled out the steaming meal, the heat from the plastic film searing my fingers. I grabbed the metal spoon lying on the counter, its coolness a stark contrast to the hot food. I bent it yielded without resistance, like putty in my hands. I bent it back the other way, and it went just as easily. No mark remained where my thumb had pressed, no indentation to prove what I'd done. You have got to be fucking kidding me. SDR 27/Dex9/Con 4/INT7/WIS 3/CHA0. I looked at the 0 under CHA. The number was accurate. I had not earned a single point of charisma all day. I looked around my small, cluttered kitchen. The fluorescent strip light flickered once before steadying. I took a deep breath, the air heavy with the scent of last night's microwave dinner. My hand tightened around the bent spoon as I started to lower myself to the floor. I sat down on the kitchen floor with the spoon in one hand and my phone in the other. The phone buzzed 3 more times before I looked at it. +1 SDR, +1 SDR, +2 SDR, encrypted. For the first time in 5 years, I was looking forward to the next buzz. The buzz came again before I had stood up. I sat on my kitchen floor, the spoon still in my hand. The notifications kept coming, one after another, like a flock of birds migrating south for the winter. Each buzz brought with it a familiar sensation, a warmth that seemed to spread from my chest outwards, and I knew without looking that my stats were climbing. The phone rested in my palm, its smooth surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent light above. I stared at the spoon, now bent 90 degrees at its middle, as if it was an artifact from another world, which, in a way, it was. I decided to test something. I unlocked the phone and pulled up the notification screen. No +1 SDR, no overlay this time, just the plain text of the unread messages, piling up like laundry left too long in the basket. I closed the app and waited. Another buzz came in and there it was, +1 SDR. I opened the message again, read it this time, nothing happened, closed it, buzz, nothing. A small, tired laugh escaped me. So that was the rule. Only unread notifications counted. The universe had decided my cheat was to be a man who didn't reply. I let the spoon fall from my hand and onto the linoleum with a soft clatter. It rolled a few inches before coming to rest beside an ancient stain I'd never quite been able to scrub out. I stood up, leaving the bent spoon where it lay, and stretched my arms above my head. My body felt different, heavier somehow, but not in a bad way, like I was finally carrying around all the weight I'd been owed. I wasn't going to move from this kitchen until I understood exactly what was happening to me, until I knew just how much stronger, faster, smarter I could become. The notifications kept coming, and I let them pile up, unread, as I waited for whatever came next. I stepped out of the kitchen, my eyes scanning the familiar landscape of my living room. The lamp in the corner cast its usual glow, illuminating the bookshelf with its meager collection and the stack of takeout menus I'd been meaning to throw out. The IKEA couch sat there, sagging slightly in the middle from years of use, dust particles dancing lazily on the windowsill. My personal phone lay face up on the coffee table, silent for months now. I picked it up, the weight of it feeling different somehow. I toggled off the mute setting and cranked the vibration up to max. Then, I delved into the settings, disabling Do Not Disturb with a sense of purpose. One by one, I turned on every notification I'd silenced over time. Sales emails, Reddit replies, app updates, even Slack messages from my old college group chat that I hadn't bothered checking in ages. Each tap of the screen felt like a decision made, a change accepted. As I waited for each setting to switch back on, I watched as notifications began to flood in. The phone buzzed, and with each vibration, a system message bloomed before my eyes. Notification received. +1 SDR. Total SDR 50. Notification received. +1 DEX encrypted. Total DEX 40. I watched my stats climb, each notification bringing a small thrill of anticipation. It was like watching a counter ticking upwards at a steady pace. Notification received. App update Twitter. New direct message received from @LucasSmith27. +1 WIS unencrypted. Total WIS 23. I glanced at the messages, my eyes skimming over the mundane conversations. None of it mattered now, not really. Not when every buzz could bring something new, something stronger. Notification received. Reddit reply on r/askhistorians from u/minparkmemory. +1 INT unencrypted. Total INT 42. I leaned back into the couch, both phones now face up beside me. The notifications kept coming, each one bringing a little surge of power, a little spark of something more than just myself. I watched them roll in, ready for whatever came next. But for now, this was enough. This was everything. I sat there, eyes glued to my phone as notifications rolled in. Each one was a buzz, a tangible tingle in my palm. I did some mental math. At this rate, it would take hours to max out my stats. So, I decided to speed things up. I signed up for every spam newsletter I could find on Google. They promised exclusive deals, daily horoscopes, and election updates. My inbox was flooded with confirmations. Each one brought a buzz, each one an overlay. +1 SDR. +1 DEX. +2 con encrypted. I watched my stats climb steadily. This was everything. I felt invincible just watching the numbers grow. But there was something else too, a hunger, a thirst for more. Encrypted notifications gave bigger gains, that much was clear. The next encrypted notification hit, as expected, but this time it was different. +10 INT encrypted. My heart pounded. I felt a surge of understanding, of clarity. The system wasn't just rewarding me for notifications, it was rewarding me for meaningful communication. Encrypted meant real. It meant something more. I leaned back against the couch, my mind racing. Then, without warning, another overlay popped up. Class evaluation, operator detected, accept class assignment, YN. I blinked at the prompt, caught off guard. I wasn't ready for this. Not yet. So I looked away, letting the prompt fade into nothingness. A small footer appeared briefly before disappearing completely. Decision deferred. Prompt will reappear at next eligible threshold. I took a deep breath, trying to process it all. The system was offering me something new, something significant, but I wasn't ready to commit yet, not until I understood what being an operator really meant. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of my experiment: broken chopsticks, a mangled butter knife, and a crumpled beer can lay scattered on the counter. I picked up another beer can from the pack, holding it in my hand like a drumstick. I squeezed. The aluminium gave way with a noise like distant thunder. The can collapsed into itself, flattening out against my palm. I tossed it onto the growing pile of debris and leaned against the counter, looking at my hands. They looked the same as always, slightly too long for my frame, nails trimmed short, calluses on the tips from years of gripping a mouse, but they felt different, stronger, capable. I turned them over in my hands, examining them like I might an unfamiliar tool. What else could they do? I walked over to the cabinet where I kept my mugs. I took one down, a heavy stoneware affair with a glaze that looked like cracked ice, and held it at arm's length. Then I let it go. It fell, dropping towards the tiled floor with an inevitability that made my heart skip. But before it could shatter, my hand shot out and caught it. Not by conscious thought, but by instinct, by reflex. I stood there for a moment, holding the mug in one hand, my arm extended. Then I brought it back up to the cabinet, setting it gently down among its brethren. My hands still felt like my hands, heavy maybe, but human. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely. I held it, counting the seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. By the time I reached 90, I was starting to feel lightheaded, but not winded, not gasping for air like I used to after climbing the stairs at work. I let the breath out slowly, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. The notifications kept coming, buzzing my phone periodically. I hadn't checked my stats in hours, but I didn't need to. I could feel them changing, shifting beneath my skin like muscles growing. SDR, Dex, Con. I turned away from the cabinet, looking across the room. My eyes landed on the couch, an old, beat-up thing that had seen better days, but it was still heavy, still bulky. Could I lift it, just one-handed? I walked over to it, running my hand along the worn fabric. It felt solid beneath my touch, heavy, but my hands, they felt ready. I bent down, wrapping my fingers around the edge of the cushions. And then I paused, because even though I knew what was coming, I could feel it in the tension coiling through my muscles. I wasn't quite ready to commit yet. Not until I understood everything that this new strength meant. Not until I knew exactly what I was capable of. I walked over to the couch, its familiar bulk looming against the wall. It had been with me through college, 2 roommates, and a breakup. I wrapped my hand around one end, feeling the rough grain of the wooden leg. 200 pounds, easy. I lifted. It came up as if it was no heavier than a kitchen chair. I held it there for a moment, astonished at how effortless it felt. Then I set it back down gently, more out of habit than necessity. I rounded the couch and sat in the middle, where the springs had worn in just right to cradle my hips. My personal phone lay on the cushion beside me, buzzing softly with another notification. I picked it up, swiping absently until I found an article about a dungeon break 2 days ago. Some hunters had responded, no casualties reported. I tossed the phone back onto the couch and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at my hands. They looked normal enough, but they just lifted 200 pounds like it was nothing. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I was watching someone else's body perform these impossible feats. The city lights flickered through the cracked window, casting long shadows across the room. My phone buzzed again, another notification received. I didn't look at it. Instead, I reached out and touched the armrest of the couch, feeling the solid weight of it under my fingers. For the first time since this all started, I felt a sense of calm. This was real. This was happening to me, and I was going to figure it out. I sat back, letting the familiar worn-in cushion embrace me. The city lights blurred into a stream of colors outside the window, and I let my eyes fall closed, my mind racing with possibilities. I was at SDR 50. The article said the hunters who responded to the dungeon break were B rank. I didn't know what a B rank was. I had a feeling I would soon. The first dungeon break in our city happened at 10:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was on a call when I noticed it. A ripple, quiet as breath, moving through the office like a whisper, heads lifting from screens, phones checked, glances exchanged. Hyo-jin, in the cube next to mine, turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine. "You seen the news?" she asked. I hadn't. I finished my call, muted my line, opened the news on my second monitor. Tier 2 dungeon break, financial district, 3 S-ranks en route, bureau cordoning off 12 blocks. Live feed showed grey hunch things spilling out, too many limbs each. Standard breach beasts. Notifications buzzed in my bag at my feet. +1 SDR, +1 Dex. I didn't look, just watched the monitor, hands resting on my desk. Director Lee's office door opened, his voice carried down the aisle. "Everyone to the break room, now." I stood, pushing my chair back. The others were already moving, drawn by the collective hum of excitement and fear. Notifications continued to buzz in my bag, but I left them there, unchecked. This wasn't my fight, not yet. But it was coming, wasn't it? The system had activated for me 2 nights ago. It was only a matter of time before it pulled me in. But for now, I followed the others to the break room. For now, I watched on the big screen like everyone else. For now, I was just Min Park, help desk rep at Stellable. Not a hunter, not yet. Just a guy watching monsters spill out of a gate on live news. I stood at the back of the break room, arms crossed, as everyone huddled around the TV. The local news anchor was mid-sentence about some celebrity hunter, his voice filled with admiration. "And there's Sung-ho Kim, known to many of you as the Lightbringer." A murmur of awe rippled through our little group. I kept my face neutral, watching, but not participating in their enthusiasm. "Did you see that great sword guy?" someone from accounting asked, eyes wide. "He just cleaved that monster in half." Hyo-jin stood nearby, her arms also crossed, a small frown on her face. She glanced at me briefly before speaking up. "That's not the hard part," she said quietly, looking back at the TV. "The hard part is the cleanup." I raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. I hadn't expected that from her. The broadcast cut to footage of Sung-ho Kim walking through a horde of creatures, touching them and leaving them lifeless on the ground. The commentator was practically swooning over him. Director Lee walked in, looking harassed. "All right, everyone," he said, clapping his hands together. "Show's over, back to your desks." As we all started to disperse, Hyo-jin glanced at me again. I caught her eye this time, and she gave a small shrug before turning away. I headed back to my desk, the faint sound of the news anchor saying, "No civilian casualties reported as of this hour," following me out. The system hadn't displayed any notifications during the broadcast, but I could feel something inside me shifting, like a gear clicking into place. I was ready for more, even if I didn't know what that meant yet. But for now, it was back to work, back to being just Min Park help desk rep. The system could wait, the monsters too. For now, there were tickets to close and notifications to ignore. I sank into my chair, letting the cushion absorb me as I leaned back from the break room crowd. My second monitor flickered with the dungeon feed, muted but still there, like a silent countdown to something I couldn't quite grasp. I swiveled back to my primary screen, the tickets queue mocking me with its endless scroll. The first call came in, an irate user from sales who'd lost his login credentials. Again, I took his information, navigated Stellable's backend with practiced ease, and reset his password while he ranted about secure systems. When he finally hung up, I felt a twitch under my fingers, +1 INT. The system's notification bloomed like an afterthought in the corner of my vision. 3 more tickets followed, each one falling into place with a satisfying click as I resolved them. Patterns emerged, solutions clicked into place before I even thought about them. My hands danced over the keyboard, typing out responses that felt automated, detached from me. +1 INT again, then +2 INT. My total ticked upwards, but it was just numbers on a screen, wasn't it? The dungeon feed showed the greatsword hunter disappearing into the boss room. The anchors filled the silence with speculation, their voices grating against my nerves. I pushed my chair back, letting it scrape against the floor with a noise that didn't quite drown them out. I sat there, hands hovering over the keyboard, not taking any new calls. My mind was elsewhere, torn between the feed and the stats bar at the corner of my vision. SDR78/Dex32/Con22/INT42/WIS22/CHA0. I could be there in 20 minutes by train. I could help. But I didn't move. My hands didn't type out the words, "I'd like to help." Instead, they reached for another ticket, clicked on it, and started typing out a response. Another user with a problem Stellable's software couldn't solve on its own. Not yet, anyway. The feed finally showed movement. The greatsword hunter emerged from the boss room, his sword dripping something dark onto the ground. The anchors let out a collective breath, their faces splitting into relieved smiles. All clear sounded, flashed across the screen in bold letters. I closed the news tab, shutting away the feed and the hunter and the monsters. I took another call, my voice calm and steady as I talked the user through their problem. Another tick upwards on my INT. Another ticket resolved. My bag sat untouched by my feet, the system's notifications gathering like unread messages in my inbox. They could wait. For now, there was work to do. There always was. I sat in my usual window seat on the evening commute, the train lurching away from Stellable Tower. My eyes flicked to the man across the aisle, his suit creaking as he shifted, scrolling through his phone with a frown. I looked away after a moment. Not my business. My own phone was out now, the local Hunter Bureau site open on the browser. The rankings page loaded, a wall of names and grades stretching from F to SSS. My eyes went to the top, where 3 names shared the S ranks. The Lightbringer's name stood out in bold, his hands of light a vivid image in my mind. I closed the site, my reflections staring back at me on the darkening screen. I thought about the grades, about what I might be if I was ranked like them. The system overlay flickered briefly, then settled with internal grade, pinged. I blinked, taking it in, pinged. I didn't know what that meant yet. The train began to slow as we pulled into my stop. I stood, pushing the phone into my pocket. The grade could wait. For now, there was home to get back to. I walked the 4 blocks home, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. The night was quiet, except for the distant wail of sirens, a reminder of the chaos that had begun to unfold elsewhere in the city. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, my breath steady and even, no trace of the usual burn in my lungs. I pushed open the door, the familiar creak greeting me like an old friend. I turned on the lamp, casting a warm glow over the small kitchen. My bag hit the counter with a soft thud, the weight of my newfound strength evident even in that mundane action. The bent spoon lay where it had fallen last night, a testament to the changes that had begun to ripple through my life. I picked it up, running my thumb over the smooth curve before setting it next to the microwave. The city sprawled out before me as I stood at the window, my reflection staring back at me from the glass. The Dungeon Break district was hidden somewhere behind the towering skyscrapers, its chaos contained for now. Out there too was the Lightbringer, his name whispered in hushed tones among the hunters. My hand pressed against the cool pane, a silent salute to the unknown that lay ahead. I was at SDR78, the Lightbringer was at SS. I did not yet know what the word pinged meant. I had a feeling it meant me. Hyo-jin took the same train home as me on Thursday. I boarded my usual commuter train at the usual time, the doors sighing shut behind me as I found a seat by the window. Hyo-jin was already on it, 3 rows ahead, her hair pulled up into a messy bun that somehow made her look even younger than her 22 years. She turned and waved when she saw me, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the carriage. "Hey Min," she said as I sat down beside her, not my usual habit, but today felt different. "First time on this line for me, headed out to meet a friend in your neck of the woods." I nodded, adjusting my headset around my neck. "Yeah, which friend?" I asked, surprised. Hyo-jin was new at the help desk, fresh out of university, and still enthusiastic about her job despite the endless stream of annoyed customers we dealt with daily. Kim Jae-hun, she replied, grinning. He's been raving about this one ramen place near your apartment, wants to try it together. Notifications continued to pop up in my vision as we talked, +1 INT here, +1 STO there, but I ignored them, focusing on hyo-jin's cheerful chatter. She was still new enough to find joy in the mundane, unlike me who had been doing this job for 5 years now. My stats didn't matter when I was off the clock. The train rounded a curve, and something moving wrong caught my eye in the carriage ahead. I went very still, all conversation forgotten as I watched, waited. Hyo-jin noticed my silence, but misinterpreted it, leaning closer to continue her story about Jae-hun's latest gaming obsession. I didn't respond, my gaze fixed on the flicker of something unnatural up ahead. Min, Hyo-jin asked softly, concern creasing her brow as she followed my line of sight. What is it? I shook my head slightly, a silent warning not to draw attention our way. Nothing, I lied, but my grip tightened around the handle of my bag, knuckles turning white. +1 SDR flashed briefly in my vision, but I didn't react. Something was coming, and it wasn't human. The creature was nothing special to look at, just ugly and small, its 6 limbs scrambling over each other as it loped down the aisle. Its wide mouth opened and closed silently, revealing a row of teeth that looked more like they belonged in a child's play set than a monster. I felt a flicker of disdain. This was what we were afraid of. This was the terrifying beast that had everyone panicking. I stepped forward, pushing through the crush of people trying to retreat from it. Hyo-jin's fingers tightened on my sleeve, but I didn't look back at her. I couldn't afford the distraction. The creature saw me and stopped, its head cocking to one side as if considering this new obstacle. Its eyes were black marbles, unreadable, unknowable, but it was clear that it had made a decision. It lunged at me, all 6 limbs propelling it forward with surprising speed. I didn't dodge. I couldn't risk the thing getting past me and hurting someone else. Instead, I braced myself, planting my feet firmly on the floor of the train carriage. The creature hit me like a bowling ball, knocking the air out of my lungs but not moving me an inch. I was too focused on the creature. It scrambled up my body, its claws digging into my clothes and skin, trying to find purchase. I could feel blood starting to well up under my shirt, but I ignored it. I grabbed the creature by its hind legs and threw it as hard as I could towards the back of the carriage. It sailed through the air, all 6 limbs flailing, before crashing into a pile of terrified passengers. There was a moment of stunned silence, then everyone started to move at once. Some people tried to run, others tried to help those who had been knocked down. The creature, dazed but still alive, began to struggle back onto its feet. I stepped between it and the nearest passengers, my stance loose but committed. I wasn't going to let this thing hurt anyone else. Not on my watch. The creature lunged at me, its eyes wild and feral. I'd seen enough breach creatures to know what was coming. I sidestepped once, feeling the train carriage shift beneath my feet. My hand shot out, grabbing it by the neck just as it began to arc through the air. I slammed it down onto the floor with a force that echoed through the carriage. The metal groaned in protest, and something wet snapped inside the creature. It didn't move again. I stayed crouched over it for a beat, my heart pounding in my chest like a metronome, but my hands were steady. The silence was deafening. All eyes were on me, including Hyo-jin's. She stood there, mouth agape, her lunch box clutched to her chest. Behind me, someone started retching. I didn't look back. +1 SDR, the system flashed across my vision. My stats updated in the corner of my eye. SDR 95/Dex 42/Con 30/INT 55/Wis 30/CHA 0. The creature's body started to dissolve, leaving behind a small orb that pulsed with energy. I didn't reach for it, not yet. The train slowed as we approached the next station. Without a word, I stood up and stepped off onto the platform. The doors slid shut behind me, leaving the orb untouched on the now pristine floor of the carriage. As the train pulled away, I walked towards the escalator, leaving the stairs and whispers behind. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered as I ascended, casting my shadow in stark relief against the polished metal steps. My hands were still steady, but there was a tremor in my knees that had nothing to do with strength. The cold air nipped at my fingers as I walked, hands buried deep in my coat pockets. Street lamps cast long shadows that danced with each passing car, their reflections flickering on the wet pavement. It was 3 stations early, but I didn't mind the extra distance. My apartment building loomed ahead, a familiar silhouette against the night sky. I replayed the scene at the station in my head. The creature's eyes had been wide, surprised even as my hands closed around its scaly throat. There'd been no time for fear, only instinct. Grab, slam, done. I felt nothing, not quite. There was a quiet satisfaction, like closing a particularly difficult help desk ticket. My phone buzzed against my palm, more insistent than usual. Combat detected. Skill unlocked. Composure passive LV1 reduces emotional reaction during combat. I almost snorted. Composure. As if killing something could ever be composed. But here we were. The glow of the entrance sign welcomed me, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill outside. I paused under it, looking up at the old neon lights that had flickered since before I moved in. This was home. This was normal. Today had been different. With a sigh, I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the familiar hum of the lobby. No notifications, no skills, just the quiet comfort of routine. For now, that was enough. SDR95/Dex42/Con30/INT55/WIS30/CHA0. The lamp cast a dim glow over my apartment, barely enough to navigate by as I dropped my bag by the door and shrugged off my coat. My phone buzzed in my pocket, not with an overlay notification, but with a text from hyo-jin. I pulled it out, unlocking the screen to read her message. "I saw what you did. Are you okay?" I sank onto the couch, the same one that had seemed like an immovable object just 2 nights ago when I'd lifted it with ease. The memory of the monster on the train was still fresh in my mind, its growls echoing in my ears despite the quiet hum of my apartment. I stared at hyo-jin's text, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I considered how to respond. "I'm fine," I typed out after a moment, then immediately deleted it. It felt too dismissive, too casual for what had happened. But anything more would risk revealing the truth about my abilities, and that was something I wasn't ready to share. I settled on nothing at all, letting her text sit unanswered in our chat as I leaned back against the cushions, my gaze fixed on the blank screen of my TV across the room. The system overlays were still faintly visible in my vision, ghosts of notifications and stats that refused to fade completely. They flickered like distant headlights, reminders of a world I was only just beginning to understand. I did not reply to her text that night. +1 SDR. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I picked the gate the way I picked frozen dinners. I sat on my couch Saturday morning, sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across my legs. I'd been awake for an hour, mind too restless to sleep any longer. The Hunter Bureau dungeon map was open on my laptop, 19 options blinking at me within an hour's travel by metro. Low tier, unattended, accessible, I could have had my pick. But none of them called to me, not until I saw it, a gate near the hardware store on Kim Street. I could buy gloves, a pry bar, something to use besides my bare hands. I wasn't a hunter, not like they were, but maybe today I could pretend. Notifications pinged in the corner of my vision as I stared at the map. +1 SDR. I blinked them away, focusing on the task at hand. I didn't need distractions, not when I was finally going to do something real. I stood up, stretching arms that ached from weeks spent hunched over a desk. My coat hung by the door, the same one I wore to work every day. Unremarkable, just like me, but today it would take me somewhere different. Today it would take me to a gate. The metro station was a 10-minute walk away, the familiar clatter of trains echoing through the tunnel. I stood on the platform, hands in my pockets, waiting for the train that would take me to Kim Street, to the hardware store, to the gate. As the train pulled in, I took a deep breath. This was it. No more notifications, no more stats gained from listening to other people's fights. Today, I'd earn them myself. I stood at the edge of the vacant lot, eyeing the gate. It wasn't much to look at, just a shimmer in the air, but it was real enough to give me a stat boost when I stepped through. The chain-link fence around it was rusted and bent in places, with a faded, no TOSBSSING sign hanging crookedly on one of the posts. I adjusted my grip on the pry bar, feeling the familiar weight that now felt like nothing at all. My gloves were tight but flexible, a stark contrast to the heavy-duty work gloves I'd been using for years. They felt right. The gate itself was about 4 feet off the ground, too high to reach without jumping, but that wasn't going to stop me. I took a few steps back and then sprinted forward, launching myself into the air with a burst of strength that still surprised me. +1 SDR. I sailed through the shimmer, my body tingling as I passed through it. The sensation was brief but intense, like stepping out of a hot shower onto cold tiles. Then I was on the other side, landing lightly in the gravel. I dusted off my hands and looked around. There was nothing special about this place. It could have been any loading dock or back alley in the city, but there was an undercurrent of tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. New title, Initiate. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill my lungs. It was time to prove myself again. End of scene. The cave air was thick with damp and ozone, the kind that coats your tongue like a thin film of rust. The light was low, a sickly blue glow seeping from the walls and ceiling, casting long shadows that danced with every movement. I could smell the creatures before I saw them, that same scent of decay and musk that had filled the train car days ago. I held the pry bar at its center, gripping it like an extension of my arm. The first pair came at me, their eyes glowing like embers in the dim light. They moved with a jerky, almost mechanical grace, but I was ready for them. I stepped to the side as the first one lunged, bringing the pry bar down on its neck with a sickening crunch. +1 SDR. The creature fell to the ground, its body twitching before stilling completely. Its companion fared no better, meeting the same fate mere seconds later. Two more creatures emerged from the darkness, their forms slightly different from the ones I'd faced before, but no less threatening. They were slower than the first pair, their movements almost ponderous, but I had plenty of time to adjust my grip on the pry bar and bring it down in a swift arc that caught both creatures off guard. +1 Dex. The cave seemed to hold its breath for a moment before exhaling another group of creatures into my path. This time there were 3 of them, their forms almost identical save for the color of their eyes. I felt a flicker of annoyance at the predictable pattern, but pushed it aside as composure kicked in. Skill, composure right arrow LV. 2. The world around me seemed to slow down, the creatures moving in a kind of languid dance that I could anticipate and counter with ease. I moved through the cave like a machine, each creature falling under my blows with practiced efficiency. The pry bar became an extension of my will, bending and breaking the necks of my enemies with a cold precision that was almost clinical. System messages flashed across my vision, each one punctuating another victory, another step closer to the end of this dungeon. Finally, after what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, I stood in the deepest chamber of the cave. The pulsing orb of the dungeon core sat before me, its light casting eerie shadows on the damp stone walls. I reached out and picked it up, feeling the cold weight of it in my palm. The cave seemed to sigh around me, the sound echoing through the chambers like a slow-motion exhale. The walls began to crumble, the ceiling starting to collapse as the dungeon prepared to seal itself off. End of scene. I stepped out of the gate onto the cracked concrete of the vacant lot. The air was cool and damp with a light mist that clung to my skin. Behind me, the gate shimmered and pulsed as it prepared to seal itself off, its walls crumbling inward like dry sandcastles at high tide. The lot was empty save for one thing, a woman on a folding chair set up against the chain-link fence about 30 feet away. She hadn't been there when I went in. She was in her 40s, her face weathered by years of sun and wind, her unbranded jacket worn but clean. Her eyes were fixed on her phone, her fingers tapping out a steady rhythm as she typed. I could feel her gaze on me, like the weight of the dungeon core still heavy in my pocket. She wasn't looking directly at me, but I knew she was aware of me. My new INT-driven senses tingled, picking up patterns and nuances that I hadn't been able to detect before. I didn't approach her, she didn't approach me. I started walking towards the metro station, the distant hum of traffic filling my ears. As I passed her, I heard her say into her phone, very quietly, "Yeah, I've got him." Her voice was like the mist around us, cool, damp, and barely there. It sent a shiver down my spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I kept walking, the echo of her words following me like a shadow. The entrance to the metro station loomed ahead, its harsh fluorescent lights promising warmth and noise and safety. I stepped inside, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me, sealing off the vacant lot and the woman on the folding chair from view. But I knew she was still there, watching, waiting, and for some reason that made my SDR go up by 1 point, plus 1 SDR. My reflection in the glass doors showed a man with shadows under his eyes and tension around his mouth. But there was something else there too, a hardness, a resolve that hadn't been there before. I wondered if it had anything to do with the woman on the folding chair. I turned away from my reflection and joined the flow of people heading towards the platform. The train pulled in with its usual screech of metal on metal, and I stepped aboard, finding a seat by the window. As the train pulled out of the station, I watched as the vacant lot slipped out of view, replaced by the endless sprawl of the city. But even as the woman on the folding chair disappeared from sight, I knew she was still there. In my pocket, on my phone, in the system messages that flashed up whenever something changed, total SDR 120. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the train lull me into a state of semi-awareness. The woman on the folding chair was just one piece of this puzzle. There were other pieces out there too, scattered across the city like the dozens of unsanctioned gates, and I was going to find them all. Because that's what hunters do, they hunt. The train pulled away from the platform with a lurch that made my teeth clack together. I sat down heavily, still buzzing with adrenaline, plus 1 SDR. My hand closed around the dungeon core in my pocket, feeling its warm pulse against my fingertips. I watched the industrial district slide by outside the window, the factories and warehouses giving way to residential blocks. The woman on the bench faded into the background, another face among many, but her eyes lingered in my mind, a faint unease settling in my stomach. When I stepped off the train at my stop, the air was cool and damp, carrying with it the scent of rain. I walked the familiar route home, past the convenience store where Mrs. Kim nodded at me from behind the counter, past the park where kids played even though it was Saturday morning and school wasn't out yet. The key turned in the lock with a satisfying click. My apartment was quiet, the way it always was when I came home from work or from dungeons. I tossed my keys onto the counter, the clatter echoing through the empty rooms. I pulled the dungeon core out of my pocket and placed it beside the bent spoon on the counter. They sat there together, two artifacts from another world, amidst the mundane clutter of my kitchen. The lamp cast long shadows across the room, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. The spoon and the core seemed to be looking back at me, waiting for something more than this quiet, this ordinary. But all I did was turn away, leaving them there on the counter like exhibits in a museum no one else would ever visit. I had been seen, I did not know by whom. The dungeon core sat on the counter, warm. I kept the dungeon core on my kitchen counter for a day before I decided what to do with it. I spent Sunday with the dungeon core on my mind and the bent spoon in my hand. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of my laptop and the occasional buzz of my phone. I had turned off notifications. I didn't need another reminder of what I'd become entangled in. The core sat on my desk, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. It was a strange sensation, having something so powerful and otherworldly in my possession. I had looked up its worth online, sketchy forums, grainy images, whispered conversations about fences and legitimate shops. $400 cash from some unknown dealer or $2,000 in a registered shop, but that meant hunter registration. I wasn't ready for that yet. I decided to keep it, for now at least. I placed the core in a drawer, tucked away among old receipts and forgotten trinkets. It felt like hiding a secret from myself, burying something important under layers of mundane clutter. The rest of Sunday was spent making notes on my laptop, a private diary of sorts, chronicling everything the system had shown me so far. Class options, operator, listener, hunter, each with their own pros and cons, according to the system's vague descriptions. Tier classifications, normal, hard, nightmare, each a step into the unknown. Encrypted notifications, plus 10 decks here, plus 5 INT there, stacking up like unseen gains in an unbalanced game. I kept the document password protected, not that anyone could access it. My apartment was my sanctuary, my fortress against the world outside. Yet habits die hard and old paranoia runs deep. As evening drew in, I found myself exhausted but wired. The system's presence was a constant hum at the back of my mind, a reminder of what was happening just beyond the veil of normalcy. I went to bed early, hoping for dreamless sleep. But dreams don't work like that when the system is involved. That's a story for another day. For now, all I knew was that Sunday was over and Monday loomed large on the horizon. And with it, the inevitable confrontation with reality, or perhaps something even more unexpected. But that, as they say, is another chapter. I arrived at my cube on Monday morning, the fluorescent strip light casting its usual harsh glow over the maze of desks and cubicles. Hyo-jin was already at hers, 2 cubes away, her back stiff as she greeted me with a polite nod. We'd been working together for years, but since Thursday, there'd been an unspoken tension between us, like a wall that hadn't existed before. I logged into my console, the familiar hum of the ancient machine filling the air. My bag buzzed almost immediately, but I ignored it. It was probably just more notifications from the system, tallying up my stats, as if I cared about them anymore. The calls started coming in shortly after. A customer with a wonky mic, a new user struggling with the interface. I fielded them all, my high INT making it easy to resolve issues that would have stumped others. I flagged suggestions for fixes in our team Slack, and Director Lee replied with a stream of appreciative emojis. Hyo-jin took her calls too, but she seemed distracted, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. She didn't initiate conversation, and neither did I. The text she'd sent me on Thursday hung between us like an unanswered question. My bag buzzed constantly, but I kept my focus on the customers, on the tickets that needed resolving. I wasn't ready to face whatever was waiting for me in those notifications. Not yet. At noon, I stood up and stretched, feeling the familiar ache in my muscles, the familiar tug of the system. "I'm going to lunch," I said to no one in particular. Hyo-jin looked up from her console, her eyes meeting mine briefly before she nodded. As I walked out of the office, the weight of the notifications in my bag seemed to grow heavier with each step. But I didn't check them. Not yet. Today was just another Monday, and I wasn't ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The line at the food truck was longer than usual, but I didn't mind. It gave me time to check my notifications, 3 new notifications. I dismissed them without looking. They were likely just more recruitment offers from guilds I'd ignored last week. I stepped up to the counter and ordered my usual, a bulgogi bowl with extra kimchi. The cashier, a familiar face with a name tag that read Jimmy, rang me up. "Same as always, huh, Min?" he asked. I nodded, handed him the money, and stepped aside to wait. A woman slipped in beside me, her eyes scanning the menu overhead. It was the same woman from the dungeon exit last week, the one who'd been sitting on a folding chair. She was wearing the same unbranded jacket, though today it was zipped up against the chill. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and she carried a thermos in one hand. She ordered the same thing I had, her voice clear and confident. When Jimmy handed her the bag, she paid with cash, then stepped aside to wait just like I had. We stood there for a moment, 2 strangers sharing an unspoken understanding of the lunch rush routine. Then she turned to me. "You're Min Park," she said, her gaze steady. "I work for a guild network. I'd like to buy you lunch." I looked at her, then at my own bag in my hands. The food truck called out, "Order up." It was mine. I took it and started walking towards the small public bench where I usually ate, 2 minutes from the truck. She fell into step beside me. We sat down on either end of the bench, our lunches in our laps. I unfolded my plastic fork, stabbed into my bulgogi, and took a bite. It was good. Jimmy had outdone himself today. The woman opened her thermos and poured herself some tea. "Well," she prompted, raising an eyebrow, "aren't you going to ask why I want to buy you lunch?" I swallowed my mouthful, then looked at her. "Why do you want to buy me lunch?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She smiled, a slow curve of her lips that seemed more amused than friendly. "Because," she said, "I think it's time we had a little chat about your future, Min Park." I sat across from Yuna Cho, her folding chair open on the grass beside mine. She handed me a sandwich wrapped in paper, and I took it without comment. The system had notified me the moment she'd arrived, Unicho within 50 FT, but I didn't look at my phone. I unwrapped the sandwich instead, revealing roast beef and avocado on whole grain. "I'm not here to ambush you," Yuna said, her voice calm despite the amused curve of her lips. "I've been watching your progress, Min." I took a bite of the sandwich. It was good, but I didn't say so. I had learned over the years that silence could be as useful as speech. "You cleared a low-tier gate in 12 minutes Saturday," she continued. "That's a B-rank time on paper. I'd like to know what your number is actually." I chewed, swallowed. "I don't know my number." Yuna didn't miss a beat. "My guild will register you, train you, place you on a team. Salary starts at 6 figures. You wouldn't have to take help desk calls anymore." She took a bite of her own sandwich, watching me with an expression that was almost affectionate. I shook my head once firmly. "No thanks." Yuna finished her mouthful, then leaned back in her chair. "I understand your reluctance," she said, as if I'd given some long speech instead of 2 words. "But anyone clearing a gate solo gets flagged. You'll have to register eventually." "I'll wait," I replied, taking another bite of my sandwich. Yuna nodded, as if this was the answer she'd expected. She finished her lunch in silence, then stood up and wiped her hands on her jeans. "I should go," she said. "It's been a pleasure meeting you, Min." She held out a business card, just her first name, Yuna Cho, and a phone number printed in clean black typeface. I took it without looking at it too closely. "Just in case you change your mind," she added with a smile that was more professional than amused this time. Then she walked away, leaving me sitting alone on the grass with my half-eaten sandwich and her card tucked into my pocket. I watched her go, then turned my attention back to my lunch. The system had notified me of her departure, Yuna Cho out of range, but I didn't look at my phone until after I'd finished eating. By then, she was gone from the park entirely, and it was just another quiet afternoon in the middle of a long week. I sat down at my desk, the chair rolling back into its usual spot with a familiar creak. My screen flicked on, displaying the queue of tickets waiting for resolution. 97 calls ahead of me, and it was only 1:05 p.m. I took the first call, listening to a customer's static-filled voice recount her Wi-Fi issues. "All right, ma'am," I said after 90 seconds, "I've restarted your router. Can you check if that's made a difference?" As she rustled around off mic, I retrieved Yuna Cho's business card from my pocket and glanced at it. Just her name and number, no guild insignia or fancy logo. I tucked it into my desk drawer next to the stapler, the card's edge lining up with the drawer's lip. My phone buzzed against my thigh as I hung up on the call. +1 INT, the system informed me. I glanced at my stats in the corner of my screen. SDR 145/Dex 70/Con 52/INT 90/Wis 50/CHA 0. Another buzz followed immediately, different this time. The actual phone, not a notification. I looked down and saw an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Hunter Bureau, Registration Inquiry." I didn't open it, not yet. I had a queue of calls to resolve first. My next caller popped up on the screen, a regular, complaining about his gaming latency. I leaned back in my chair and waited for him to connect. "Hello, sir," I began. "Tell me what you've tried so far." I did not open the email. The next call queued. I picked up the headset. I opened the bureau email at 7:32 on a Tuesday morning, 3 sips into my coffee. I stood in my kitchen, the fluorescent strip light casting harsh shadows on the countertop. The microwave dinner sat untouched, congealing in its tray. I hadn't opened that email since Monday. It was still unread, a neon flag among the spam and memos in my inbox. But today, I figured it was time to face it. I clicked on the subject line, "Hunter Registration Inquiry, Voluntary Disclosure Requested." 3 paragraphs of polite, formal language unfurled on the screen. The Bureau had identified a potential unregistered, awakened individual at my address. They requested a voluntary informational meeting at their offices or at a location of my choosing, at my earliest convenience. I read it twice, the words sinking in like stones in a pond. There was a name at the bottom, Park Junho, A-Rank, Field Liaison. I closed the email, the cursor blinking expectantly for a response that never came. I grabbed my lunchbox and headed out, leaving the uneaten dinner and the unanswered email behind. SDR 170. Int 130. The fluorescent strip light flickered as it warmed up, casting a harsh glow over my desk. I was midway through resolving another routine ticket when Director Lee approached me. "Min," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we have a visitor." I looked up from my monitor and saw a man in his 40s standing behind him. Clean suit, no tie, an unobtrusive lapel pin shaped like a small star, an A-rank insignia. I felt a faint prickle at the back of my neck. "Park Junho," he introduced himself, extending a hand towards me. "Hunter Bureau, I sent you an email this morning." I stood up, shaking his hand briefly. "I read it," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I'd like a few minutes of your time," Junho said, gesturing towards the conference room at the end of the floor. "We can step into a conference room if it's easier." Director Lee, hovering behind him like a nervous parent, assured us that it was fine. I grabbed my notepad and pen, walking ahead as we made our way to the small conference room. I could feel Hyo-jin's eyes on me from her cube. As the door closed behind us, shutting out the hum of the help desk floor, Junho took a seat at the head of the table. I sat across from him, pen poised over my notepad. The hunter agent watched me with an expression that was neither friendly nor hostile. Just waiting. "All right, Min," he began, "let's talk about Unicho." The conference room was a sterile white, the kind of blandness that made it hard to focus on anything but the task at hand. Junho sat across from me, his hands folded neatly on the table. He had a folder with him, but he didn't open it. I wondered what was inside, but I didn't ask. "All right, Min," he began, his voice calm and professional, "let's talk about Unicho." I leaned back in my chair, letting it creak softly. "What about her?" "A scout reported observing you clear a low-tier gate solo on Saturday, 12-minute clearance. That's a B-rank performance on paper. The Bureau is required to follow up on any sighting of an unregistered hunter." "Is that so?" I replied, keeping my voice even. Junho nodded. "Can you tell me about your awakening?" I hesitated before answering. I'd rather not. He didn't push the issue. Instead, he waited a beat before continuing. "Min, you're not in trouble. Awakened individuals exist on a spectrum, and not all of them are obligated to register. But the Bureau has protective interests. We'd like to know your ranking band so we can decide whether to monitor you for your safety." I considered his words, then asked, "What if I'm not interested in being monitored?" Junho didn't seem surprised by my question. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady on mine. "That's your right. Most A-rank and above unregistered individuals are eventually approached by foreign intelligence services or organized crime. We can offer a layer of protection if you accept registration." I picked up the business card he had placed on the table and looked at it for a moment before putting it back down. "I'll think about it," I said. Junho stood up, his chair scraping softly against the linoleum floor. "Take your time, Min. The Bureau's offer stands." He extended his hand towards me. After a brief hesitation, I shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. As he walked out of the conference room, I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. I picked up his business card again, turning it over in my hands before slipping it into my pocket. Then I sat there for a moment longer, thinking about Unicho and her report, about Junho's calm demeanor and his offer of protection. Finally, I stood up, the chair squeaking softly as it rolled back from the table. I picked up the bent spoon I had brought with me and placed it in my pocket alongside Junho's card. Then I left the conference room, my footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. I walked back to my cube, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like a swarm of distant bees. Hyo-jin didn't look up as I passed, her fingers dancing on her keyboard in a rhythm I'd long since stopped trying to understand. I sat down in my chair, the familiar squeak greeting me like an old friend. I pulled up 3 more tickets, the numbers swimming before my eyes as I dove into the familiar world of passwords forgotten and printers jammed. My hands moved automatically, my brain half on the job, half on Junho's words echoing in my mind like a poorly recorded message. 40 minutes later, I had resolved the tickets, each one closing with a soft click as I marked them complete. The team Slack flickered to life, Director Lee's message appearing like a beacon in my DMs. Check in if you want to chat. I read it once, twice, then closed the tab without replying. I pulled up the Hunter Bureau's public registry page, my cursor hovering over the search bar for a moment before I typed in Park Junho. His profile popped up, an A-rank hunter with 12 years under his belt. Specialty, anti-rogue investigations. I wondered how many times he'd used that line on other hunters before me. I closed the tab, my reflections staring back at me from the blank screen. My bag buzzed at my side, +1 SDR, flashing across my vision. I ignored it, focusing instead on the next ticket, a printer jam in the marketing department. I walked them through the steps over Slack, their gratitude echoing hollowly in my ears. 5 o'clock rolled around, the office gradually emptying like sand in an hourglass. I packed up my bag, +1 SDR, flashing again as I stood up. I made my way to the elevator, the lights reflecting off the polished floors, casting everything in a harsh, artificial glow. The doors slid shut behind me, the last of the day's notifications fading away as I stepped into the dimly lit lobby. I walked out into the evening, the city lights blinking on like a constellation come to life. My phone buzzed again, +1 SDR, reminding me that even off the clock, there was no escaping this world. I stuffed my hands in my pockets, the bent spoon pressing against my fingers like a talisman. The train pulled up to the platform, its doors sighing open like an invitation. And just like that, another day ended and another began. The train rumbled away, leaving behind the familiar hum of the city night. I trudged up the stairs to my apartment, the weight of the day heavy on my shoulders. As I collapsed onto the couch, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and stared at an unfamiliar number on the screen. Park, saw your name on a bureau watch list today. Call me when you can. Joon Lim. It had been 3 years since we last spoke, since he'd climbed out of the help desk pit and into the world of B-rank hunts. I read his message twice, the words sinking in like stones in my stomach. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone, laid it face down on the couch beside me, and reached for the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, except for the soft glow from the streetlights outside, casting long shadows that danced with the silence. I had not heard from Joon Lim in 3 years. The phone stayed face down on the couch. My father texted me on a Wednesday in October at 6:41 in the evening. I boarded the usual Wednesday train, same window seat as always. Hyo-jin wasn't on this one, her absence a quiet echo in the rhythm of my days. The buzzes started almost immediately, stat overlays flickering at the edge of my vision like digital fireflies. I let them be, their numbers familiar and unchanging. Then came a buzz that felt different, heavier. I blinked as the overlay materialized, +10 con, encrypted. Encrypted gains were nothing new, work emails, banking notifications, security alerts. But this one felt personal. I pulled out my personal phone, breaking the rhythm of familiar stat gains. The lock screen displayed a single message, a text from an unfamiliar number. I knew who it was before I opened it. Min, I am sober now. I would like to see you. The words seemed to weigh heavier than any encrypted gain. I stared at them as the train rumbled on, each passing station marking off another minute of silence between us. 3 years of silence, then this. A simple sentence, yet it stirred something within me, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge for a long time. The train pulled into my stop, the sudden jerk breaking the trance. I looked up, the message still unanswered on my screen. The other passengers disembarked around me, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of those 11 words. As I stepped out onto the platform, I made a decision. I wouldn't reply tonight, not yet, but neither would I delete the message or silence the notifications. For now, that was enough. The train pulled away, leaving me standing there, a silent promise hanging in the air like a question mark waiting for an answer. The cold was sharp, slicing through my jacket like a blade through paper. I walked against it, hands jammed into my pockets, breath misting in front of me. The river was on my left, its surface as still and black as oil under the streetlights. It had been months since the last dungeon gate had appeared here, but the memory of it lingered like an unpleasant smell. I turned away from the river, heading towards the old paint factory. Its chimney stood tall against the night sky, a silent sentinel over the abandoned lot. The factory had closed years ago, its walls now tagged with graffiti and its windows broken. I used to come here as a kid, my mother's warnings echoing in my ears as I dared myself to explore the forbidden territory. The cold seemed to seep into my bones tonight, making each step heavier than the last. My mind wandered back to my father's text. Sober, that was all it said. No apologies, no explanations, just that one word, like a peace offering thrown into the void between us. I walked past the lot where the factory used to stand, its entrance now blocked by a chain-link fence. My father had been drunk at my mother's funeral. He had said things he shouldn't have, things I hadn't been ready to hear. And then he had stopped talking to me altogether. The cold wind picked up, howling through the empty streets like a wolf call. It reminded me of my father's silence, empty and unyielding. I wondered if sober was his way of saying sorry. I thought it probably wasn't, but I understood him well enough to know that it was as close as he could get. I reached the entrance of my building, its familiar brick facade looming above me like a tired, old sentinel. The cold had numbed my fingers, and they fumbled with the keys before slipping into the lock. As I stepped inside, the warmth embraced me like an old friend, banishing the chill from my bones. But the cold of tonight's walk lingered in my mind, like the memory of a harsh word or a cruel silence. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, each step echoing with the unspoken conversations between my father and me. For now, there were no answers, only questions hanging in the air like icicles waiting for a thaw that never came. Plus one whiz. I sat on the couch, my personal phone in hand. The screen displayed the last text conversation I'd had with my father 3 years ago. 3 years of silence hung between us like an unspoken epitaph. I tapped out a message. I don't know what to say. My thumb hovered over the send button before I hit delete. It was too much, too little, not enough. I miss her, I typed next. Delete. That wasn't it either. How could I encapsulate that raw, hollow ache in a few dozen characters? I started another message. When? But I couldn't finish it. When did he decide to reach out? When did he think of Mom and me? When did he realize that 3 years was too long to stay silent? I put the phone face down on the couch cushion, as if turning my back on it could dismiss the words unsaid. I stood up, leaving the phone behind, and went into the kitchen. The spoon from last night still lay bent on the counter, a testament to my frustration. Beside it, in the drawer, was the dungeon core, another silent witness to my life's recent upheavals. I had almost forgotten about it, tucked away amidst the clutter of everyday life. I opened the fridge, taking out ingredients for dinner. While I cooked, my mind wandered back to Mom. Her laugh, her scent, the way she hummed while she worked in the kitchen. A lump formed in my throat, and I swallowed hard against it. Dinner ready, I ate standing at the counter, too restless to sit. The food was barely tasteless, but I didn't care. It filled a void, if only for a moment. As I finished, I looked at myself in the reflection of the dark window. My eyes were tired, my jaw set tight. I rinsed off my plate, then went to brush my teeth, the weight of unsent words and unspoken memories hanging heavy on my shoulders. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, save for the pale glow of the streetlight filtering through the cracked window. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, my mind a whirlwind of memories and unsent messages. I had turned off the lamp hours ago, but my thoughts remained switched on. Suddenly, the system overlay flickered to life in front of me, larger than usual. It pulsed into existence, casting an eerie blue light across my ceiling. I blinked at it, surprise momentarily cutting through my exhaustion. Class evaluation, operator detected. Accept class assignment, YN decision threshold reached, further deferral may incur penalty. I sighed aloud, a sound that felt heavy in the quiet room. "Not tonight," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time I had spoken directly to the system, and it felt strange, like talking to myself, but not quite. The overlay flickered again, lines of code shifting and rearranging before my eyes. Then, as if responding to my words, it changed. Decision deferred at user discretion. Penalty applied. Stat gain rate reduced by 25% for the next 24 hours. I shrugged under my blanket, uncaring. It wasn't like I was gaining many stats anyway. Not lately, not since, well, not in a long time. The digital display faded away, leaving me once again alone with my thoughts. I rolled onto my side, pulling the covers tighter around me. The clock on my nightstand ticked on, each second echoing loudly in the silence. 3:52 a.m., 3:53 a.m., 3:54 a.m. Sleep didn't come easy that night, but then again, it never did. Not since she passed, not since everything changed. I set the kettle on the stove, the water rushing inside it a familiar, comforting sound. I picked up my phone from where it lay face down on the counter, the screen lighting up as I turned it over. The unsent message to father was still there. When? I hadn't meant to type that. It just came out. I hit send. The tiny whooshing sound echoed in the quiet kitchen like a gunshot. I put the kettle on the boil, watching the red light flash until it steadied into a solid glow. Then I sat down at the counter, my hands flat on the laminate, the chill of it seeping into my skin. Father would see it when he woke up. The kettle whistled, a high-pitched sound that cut through the silence like a knife. I didn't move to pour the water into my mug until it began to screech, an impatient demand for attention. As steam billowed from the spout, I watched the sky outside the window begin to lighten, the first faint tendrils of dawn stretching out across the horizon. The quiet was broken only by the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the city waking up around me. +1 SDR. I did not expect a reply for a while. The breach hit our building at 11:14 on a Friday. I was on my fourth call of the morning when hyo-jin's cube remained empty. It was 11:14, and she was usually back from her coffee run by then. I had 3 tickets resolved before 10, which was a decent start to the day, even if I hadn't slept much since Wednesday. My father still hadn't replied to my message. I'd kept it to myself, not wanting to cause a stir at work. The office was its usual hum of activity, Director Lee's door closed, accounting murmuring on calls nearby. But hyo-jin's absence was a small anomaly that prickled at the back of my mind. The call ended with a resolution, and I hung up, my gaze flicking to her empty chair again. That's when the building shuddered, a deep rumble that reverberated through the floor and into my bones. The alarm blared to life a second later, its wail piercing the morning calm. Then came the screaming. It was distant but unmistakable, rising from the lobby 3 floors below. My heart lurched, and I stood up, knocking over my mug of cold coffee in the process. The liquid spread across the desk, but I didn't notice, my attention already at the stairwell door. I walked towards it, each step purposeful, my body moving on instinct. The system hadn't displayed anything yet, no notifications flashing across my vision. But I knew something was happening, something that required me to leave my desk, to go downstairs, to do what needed to be done. As I reached the stairwell door, I paused, taking a deep breath. Then, with a determined push, I opened it and stepped inside, leaving the familiar hum of the office behind. The stairs stretched downwards, leading me towards the unknown, but also towards something I'd been avoiding for years, my true power out in the open for everyone to see. I descended the stairs with a purposeful stride, my composure skill kicking in automatically, allowing me to navigate through the chaos without drawing unnecessary attention. The stairwell was filled with a cacophony of alarms and panicked voices, but I moved against the current like a fish swimming upstream. On the 8th floor, 2 people, clutching each other tightly, hurried past me. I overheard snippets of their conversation. Hyo-jin, cafe. My heart pounded in my chest, not from exertion, but from concern for her safety. Yet I didn't pause. There was no time for distractions. On the 5th floor, the noise intensified. The building's emergency display flashed a harsh red, displaying B-rank breach evacuate in bold letters. I could hear the creature now, its growls echoing through the stairwell like thunder, but my focus remained unbroken. I kept moving downwards. On the third floor, I passed a maintenance worker huddled against the wall, his arm held tightly against his chest. The bone was visible, protruding through the skin in a grotesque manner. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but I couldn't stop. Not now, not when hyo-jin was still down there. I descended the remaining flights of stairs with renewed urgency, my heart pounding in sync with the alarms above. As I reached for the door handle to the lobby, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay beyond. The door swung open, revealing chaos and destruction, but also hyo-jin, huddled against a pillar, her eyes wide with fear but alive. For now, that was enough. I crossed the lobby in 3 strides, my shoes squeaking against the marble floor. The monster turned at the last second, its bone sides clicking as it changed trajectory. I was already in motion, my hand outstretched. It connected with the underside of its jaw, hard enough to lift it off its feet. A shockwave of force pulsed through me, resonating in my bones. +5 SDR. The monster crashed into the back wall of the cafe, drywall caving in around it like a crumbling sandcastle. I felt the impact reverberate through my arm, but there was no pain, only a dull throb that faded as quickly as it had come. Composure activated. Emotional reaction reduced. The creature struggled to its feet, the scythes on its limbs scraping against the debris-strewn floor. Its eyes, 2 burning embers set deep into its grotesque face, locked onto me. I stood my ground, the adrenaline surging through me as hot and electric as the notifications flashing across my vision. B-rank creature detected, elevated threat level. It lunged at me, its strides eating up the distance between us with terrifying speed. I braced myself, my muscles tensing in anticipation of impact. This was it. No more hiding, no more sneaking through the shadows. This time, everyone would see. The scene ends as the monster comes for Min. I grabbed its sidearm as it swung towards me, sidestepping with ease. It was fast, but not that fast. My grip tightened around the elbow joint. +5 SDR encrypted. I twisted, and there was a satisfying snap. +3 SDR. The creature screeched, a sound like metal grinding against metal. It wasn't pain, it was surprise. Notification received. +2 dex encrypted. It lunged at me again, this time aiming for my head with its other arm. I ducked under it, grabbed its neck from behind, and twisted hard. +3 SDR. There was another snap, louder this time. The creature's body went limp in my hands, its head lolling to the side. Combat data logged. I let it fall to the floor with a thud. Skill, composure right arrow LV, 4. I turned around to face hyo-jin. She was still standing there, the chair she'd been holding now at her feet. Her eyes were wide, but she wasn't screaming or crying. She just stared at me, her breath coming in short gasps. I nodded at her, a small gesture of reassurance. She took a deep breath and nodded back, lowering the chair to the floor. The building security finally showed up, 3 guards with stun batons. They skidded to a halt at the sight of the creature's body, their eyes wide behind their visors. "Stay back," I said, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "It's dead." They nodded, their batons lowering slightly. Then we all heard it, the distant wail of sirens. The bureau was coming, +1 SDR encrypted. I walked over to hyo-jin, ignoring the guards. "Are you hurt?" I asked her. She shook her head, her gaze never leaving mine. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved me." I nodded again, then turned towards the maintenance worker who'd been thrown against the wall. He was still conscious, but his arm was bent at an unnatural angle. +1 dex encrypted. "Stay still," I told him as I approached. "The bureau will have paramedics with them." He nodded, his face pale but composed. I sat down on the lobby floor, my back against the wall next to hyo-jin's now empty desk. The sirens were getting louder now, the sound filling the air like a physical thing. I closed my eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. Total SDR 225. The bureau was coming, it was time to face the music, but for now all I could do was wait, and breathe, and count the seconds until my life changed again. I stood, brushing dust off my suit as best I could. The hunter in front of me was younger than Junho, his gear pristine compared to mine. He looked at me with an odd mix of curiosity and wariness. "Are you the awakened individual who engaged the breach?" he asked. I nodded. "I am." His eyes widened slightly at my name. "You're the one Junho flagged," he said, a statement rather than a question. "Apparently," I replied, my voice flat. He took a deep breath before continuing. "We're going to register you today. You don't have a choice anymore, sorry. The breach data logs it." I looked at the creature behind him, its form still writhing in decay even after death. Then I turned back to him. "Okay," I said, resigned. The sirens outside grew louder as more emergency vehicles arrived. The hunter looked over his shoulder, then back at me. "We'll need to take a statement," he said, pulling out a tablet. "But first, let's get you away from that." I was registered as a B-rank hunter by 3 in the afternoon. My real grade was pinned. I watched myself on the news 4 times over the weekend. I spent my weekend on the couch, the TV drone a steady companion. My face was everywhere, news channels, social media clips, even a meme with captions about my 3-stride wonder. I didn't bother turning off notifications. There wasn't much to see besides the endless stream of notifications from strangers. The Bureau's spokesperson had issued a statement, calling me a newly registered B-rank hunter. It was laughable, really, but I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips whenever I heard it. They were right about one thing, though I was newly registered. That much was true. I didn't pick up calls from journalists. Their numbers flashed on my screen, unfamiliar but relentless. I let them go to voicemail unanswered. The Bureau had assigned me a comms liaison. 3 emails sat unopened in my inbox, each one marked urgent and please respond. I ignored them all. My father still hadn't replied to Wednesday's text. I'd sent it on a whim, something casual about catching up soon. Now I wasn't so sure I wanted to hear back from him, not with all this attention buzzing around me like flies. Sunday evening stretched out, quiet and uneventful. The spoon I'd bent days ago lay on the coffee table, a testament to my new strength. I picked it up, weighed its lightness in my hand. SDR 260 flashed across my vision, a reminder of just how much had changed. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow I'd be back at the office, back at my help desk job. Back to normal, except nothing felt normal anymore. Not with 4 million views on that lobby security footage and my face plastered all over the news. I set the spoon down, its curve resting gently against the empty mug beside it. The train pulled in outside, its familiar rumble a comfort amidst the chaos. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what tomorrow would bring. But for now, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the TV and the steady ticking of my apartment clock. Total SDR 260. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ping, revealing the help desk floor bathed in the harsh fluorescence of the strip lights above. The air was thick with the scent of fresh drywall and paint, remnants of the weekend's repairs. I stepped out, my shoes squeaking slightly on the polished linoleum. The stairs started immediately. Eyes flicked towards me, then away, only to flick back again a moment later. I nodded at a few familiar faces, but most avoided my gaze, their fingers twitching nervously over their keyboards. I made my way to my cube, the headset dangling heavy in my hand. Slipping it onto my ears, I felt the familiar weight of the plastic against my skull. The foam was worn thin, compressed flat from years of use. I took a deep breath, the scent of stale coffee and toner filling my lungs, and clicked open the call queue. Director Lee approached as I waited for the first call to connect. He stood at the entrance of my cube, hands clasped behind his back, his usually stern face softened with concern. "Min," he said quietly, "you don't have to be here. You can take time. You can quit if you want. The Bureau placement offer is—" "I'd like to keep working," I interrupted, looking up at him. His gaze held mine for a long second before he nodded and walked away. The first call connected with a soft beep. A woman's voice filled my ears, harassed and irate about a billing error. I listened, asked questions, navigated menus, and within 2 minutes, her frustration had turned to gratitude. I ended the call with a polite goodbye and moved on to the next. Hyo-jin was in her cube 2 over, watching me. She hadn't said anything yet, but her eyes were steady on mine when our gazes met briefly. I nodded at her, a small, subtle gesture. She nodded back, her lips curving into a soft smile before she returned to her own calls. My second call connected just as Director Lee disappeared into his office. A man this time, his voice gruff and filled with barely concealed annoyance. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was sure to be a long conversation. But that, it seemed, would have to wait. For now, there was work to do. I pushed open the door to the Bureau's regional office, a squat, unassuming building tucked between a laundromat and a pizza joint. The fluorescent strip lights hummed overhead like distant thunder, casting everything in that sickly green pallor I'd come to associate with bureaucracy. I was 37 minutes into my lunch break. The official behind the counter didn't look up from his screen as I approached. He was either unfazed by the sudden influx of B-rank hunters, or he was doing an excellent job pretending to be. I stepped up to the counter, letting the door swing shut behind me. "Min Park," I said, putting my ID card down on the worn formica. "I'm here for the orientation." The official nodded, scooped up my ID without looking at it, and waved me towards a row of chairs against the wall. "Have a seat. We'll call you when we're ready." I sat, pulling out my phone to pass the time. 43 notifications since I'd sat down, most of them about hyo-jin's interview. I scanned through them, dismissing each with a swipe. None were from my father. "Min Park," a woman emerged from behind a door marked "Employees Only." She was tall, her uniform crisp and pressed despite the heat. "Follow me." She led me to a small room at the back of the building. A table, 2 chairs, and a whiteboard took up most of the space. A steel rod lay on the table like an invitation. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to one of the chairs. She sat across from me, opened a file, and began without preamble. "You've been registered as a B-rank hunter effective Friday. This is your orientation." I listened as she ran through the paperwork forms I'd need to fill out, taxes I'd need to pay on my bounty income, licenses I'd need to obtain for certain weapons. She spoke quickly, her voice monotone, as if she'd given this same speech 100 times and was eager to get it over with. "Now," she said finally, closing the file and pushing it aside, "let's see what you can do." She picked up the steel rod from the table and handed it to me. I took it, feeling its weight in my hands. It was cool to the touch, unyielding. I closed my eyes briefly, focusing on the sensation of the metal against my palms. Then I bent it. It went without resistance, the steel groaning softly as it gave way. When I opened my eyes, the rod was bent at a 90-degree angle. I handed it back to her. She took it, examining it closely before recording something on her clipboard. "B-rank," she muttered, more to herself than to me. Then louder, "How often do you anticipate you'll be able to do that?" "Not very," I said honestly. Bending steel rods wasn't exactly something I needed to do on a regular basis. She nodded, made another note, and then handed me an ID card with my face on it. I took it, feeling the weight of it in my hand, before slipping it into my wallet alongside my driver's license and library card. "Re-evaluation every 6 months," she said, as she stood up to indicate our meeting was over. "Voluntary upgrade tests on request. Anytime your level increases significantly, you're expected to report." "Got it," I said, standing up to shake her hand. She surprised me by pulling me into a hug instead. "Welcome to the Bureau, Min Park," she whispered before releasing me and stepping back. "We'll see you in 6 months." I left the office at exactly 49 minutes past noon, walking back towards my help desk job with a new ID card burning a hole in my pocket. I was now officially part of the system, whether I liked it or not. And as much as I might have wanted to deny it, there was a certain satisfaction in that, like bending steel rods at lunchtime. I sat at my desk, the phone headset pressing against my ear as I walked a caller through the steps to update her software. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the rows of cubes stretching out around me. It was 3 p.m. "All right, ma'am," I said. "You should see your screen updating now." I hung up just as hyo-jin approached my cube. She set down a coffee cup next to my keyboard without asking. I raised an eyebrow, but she just smiled, leaning against the edge of my desk. "I haven't told anyone what I saw before the bureau got there," she said softly. "Thanks," I replied, staring at the monitor in front of me, pretending to read something important. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, "You're not actually a B-rank, are you?" I didn't answer, just picked up my coffee and took a sip. It was decent, better than the instant stuff they kept in the break room. She waited for a few seconds, then nodded as if I'd confirmed something. "That's okay," she said. "I won't ask again, but thanks for the lobby. She pushed off from my desk and walked back to her cube. I watched her go, then turned my attention back to the phone, already ringing with another call. Help desk, this is Min speaking. The afternoon ticked by in a blur of troubleshooting and system updates. The coffee went cold on my desk as I worked through lunch. At 5 p.m. sharp, the lights over our section dimmed slightly, signaling the end of the shift. I hung up on a caller's endless complaints about her printer and leaned back in my chair. The phone buzzed once more in my pocket, another notification from the system. I ignored it, picking up the cold coffee instead. As I took a sip, I noticed Hyo-jin packing up her things across the aisle. She looked over at me, catching my eye before smiling softly. I nodded back, then turned off my monitor, signaling an end to the day. The spoon from lunch was still bent in my desk drawer, a reminder of the power that now flowed through my veins. I hadn't asked for it, but there was no denying its existence anymore. I stood up, grabbing my coat and slinging my bag over my shoulder. As I walked out of the office, the lights flickered off behind me, plunging the now empty cubes into darkness. The phone buzzed again in my pocket, another reminder of the world that now existed beyond the fluorescent lights and the hum of computers. But for tonight, it could wait. I stepped out into the cool evening air, leaving the weight of the system behind me, at least for a few hours. I sat on my apartment's worn couch, the springs creaking under me like an old friend complaining about the weather. The fluorescent strip light flickered once before settling into a steady hum. Internal grade, pinned. The words floated in my vision, a harsh contrast to the mundane surroundings. I blinked, scrolling down through the stats I'd become all too familiar with over the past week. Inbox states 7 of 10. My eyes lingered on the next line. Real estimated rank by bureau scale, SS/SSS borderline. A bitter laugh escaped me. B rank indeed. The system's estimation was about as useful as a snow shovel in summer. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what came next. Class evaluation, operator, decision threshold reached, deferral cap met. There it was, the elephant in the room. Or rather, the decision staring me down from my mental inbox. I couldn't defer any longer. The system wanted an answer, but not tonight. Tonight, all I wanted was to close my eyes and pretend none of this existed. I turned off the light, leaving only the glow of the city through the cracked window to guide me. My phone lay silent on the nightstand, a stark reminder that tomorrow would bring more than just another shift at the help desk. I crawled into bed, the sheets cool against my skin, and watched the city lights dance on my ceiling. Tomorrow was soon enough to decide if I'd accept the class or not. For now, all I had were questions and no easy answers. But tonight, in the quiet of my apartment, I could be just Min Park, tired, overworked tech support specialist. Not pinned, not an operator, just me. I was pinned. The world thought I was B rank. My father had still not replied. Joon Lim came to my office at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unflattering glow over the help desk floor. I sat at my cube, eyes on the monitor, fingers poised over the keyboard. The ticket queue was a familiar comfort, a steady stream of requests and complaints that demanded nothing more than patience and proficiency. I heard the footsteps first, heavy and confident, then the rustle of leather as Joon Lim pulled up Hyo-jin's chair and sat down across from me. I didn't look up, but I could feel his gaze, sharp and unwelcome. "Min," he said, his voice as smooth as it was cold. "Long time." I met his eyes briefly before returning to the ticket. "Joon." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on my desk. His B-rank insignia glinted under the harsh lights. "You didn't reply to my text." "No," I said, keeping my tone even. His smile was a baring of teeth. "3 weeks ago you were the guy who took my old seat. Now you're on the news. Funny how things work." I didn't respond, but I felt the familiar prickle of irritation. The system chose that moment to chime in, +1 SDR. I ignored it, focusing instead on the ticket at hand. Joon watched me for a moment before leaning back in his chair. He crossed one ankle over his knee, the picture of casual arrogance. "I've got a challenge for you," he said, his voice low. "At the Bureau's training facility, video recorded, broadcast on Hunter's social media." I looked up at him then, meeting his gaze steadily. I could feel the system humming in anticipation. Challenge received. "What do you say, Min?" Joon asked, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Are you game?" I considered him for a moment before answering, my voice calm and collected. "Just say when." Joon leaned in, his voice dropping to a low hum that seemed to vibrate against the sterile office walls. His face had changed too, the casual smirk replaced by a focused intensity that made me think of a hunter locking onto their target. "A B rank doesn't break a steel rod the way you supposedly did," he said, his eyes narrowing as if trying to peer through some illusion I was casting. "The video looks like a C rank acting role. You did something else, and the Bureau is covering for you." I didn't blink, didn't so much as twitch. I just looked at him, steady and calm. "I broke the rod the way I broke the rod," I replied, my voice even. It was strange how easy it was to maintain this composure, like sliding into an old pair of gloves. Joon's nostrils flared slightly, but he pressed on. "Spar with me, Friday, Bureau training facility, recorded. We'll both find out what you actually are." I considered him for a moment, letting the silence stretch long enough to make him wonder if I was going to refuse. Then I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Friday afternoon," I agreed, 2 o'clock. Joon's lips curled into a smirk again, but this time it held an edge of satisfaction. He stood, towering over me for a moment, before turning away without offering a handshake or any other form of closure. As he walked off the floor, I watched him go, my expression unchanging. I didn't need to glance around to know that every eye in the office was on me. The silence was palpable, heavy with anticipation and whispered conjecture. But I just sat there, hands folded neatly on my desk, gaze fixed on the spot where Joon had been standing. The system flashed a notification into my vision. "New event, challenge spar with Joon Lim." I ignored it, just as I ignored the sudden spike in my stats that followed. This was just another day at the office, after all, nothing to see here. I sat on the bench across from hyo-jin, the sun warming our faces as we waited for our orders. The food truck was the same one Yuna had cornered me at weeks ago, but today it felt different, less tense. Hyo-jin hadn't said much since Monday. Her eyes were on her phone more than usual, fingers scrolling through tweets I couldn't see. I didn't ask. I knew she'd tell me when she was ready. Our orders arrived, and we ate in silence for a while. The food was good, but it wasn't why we came here. We both knew that. After a few minutes, Hyo-jin looked up from her phone. "You're sparring with Joon Lim on Friday." I nodded, mouth full. I swallowed before answering. "How do you know?" "He posted it 20 minutes ago on Hunter Twitter." She turned her phone to show me the tweet. Joon's grinning face filled the screen, a challenge written in his eyes. "Of course he did," I said, shaking my head. "He wants an audience." Hyo-jin put her phone down, her gaze steady on mine. "He's a B3, you're." She trailed off, the question hanging unspoken between us. I took a bite of my food, buying time. When I looked back at her, she was still waiting. "I'll be fine," I said, my voice even. No hint of uncertainty, no flicker of doubt. Hyo-jin studied me for a moment, then nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "You'll be fine because you'll lose carefully." I didn't confirm or deny. She knew the answer already. We finished our meal in silence, the unspoken understanding hanging between us like a shield against the world. When we were done, we walked back to the office together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows ahead of us. The training facility loomed in the distance, a silent witness to the challenge that awaited me on Friday. But for now, it was just another day at work, with Hyo-jin by my side, and that was enough. I stepped into the locker room, the echo of my footsteps betraying the emptiness of the space. It was late morning on Friday, and the Bureau's training facility was still quiet, save for a few early birds already warming up in the nearby gym. The air was heavy with the scent of sweat and disinfectant, a familiar combo that had become the olfactory signature of my life over the past few months. I locked eyes on one of the empty lockers, my reflection staring back at me from the small mirror bolted onto the door. I saw the lines around my eyes, etched deeper by years of late nights and early mornings, but also a glimmer of determination that hadn't been there before. I opened my locker, pulling out the gear I'd need for today's spar. The Bureau-issued stuff was basic heavy-duty gloves, knee pads, a mouthguard, nothing flashy, nothing magical, just practical tools to keep me from breaking something important during the fight. I pulled on the gloves, flexing my fingers to get used to the new fit. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another notification received, +1 SDR. I glanced at it, then slipped the phone back into my pocket without acknowledgement. It was becoming routine now, these notifications. A part of me had grown numb to them, but there was still a spark of satisfaction that lingered. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Today was about strategy, not strength. I'd watched hours of Joon's previous spars, analyzing his moves, predicting his patterns. He was good, better than most B-rank hunters, but he wasn't untouchable, not by a long shot. I checked my stats one last time before leaving the locker room. SDR 295/Dex, 175/Con, 130/INT 200/WIS, 122/CHA0. I knew them by heart, but seeing them there in black and white helped focus my resolve. I stepped out of the locker room, the echo of my footsteps following me into the training arena. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the cheering crowds that would soon fill these stands. But for now, it was just me, Joon, and the strategy I'd been honing for days. And that was enough. The training arena buzzed with energy as I stepped onto the mat, the fluorescent lights overhead casting harsh shadows on the concrete floor. The bleachers were packed with bureau staff, hunters, and journalists, their chatter filling the air like a low hum. Cameras clicked into position, lenses trained on me and Joon. Joon stood across from me, arms crossed, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd changed into training gear, black gi pants, and a white top with the bureau logo stitched in red thread. I wore my usual jeans and a t-shirt, no logo, nothing to mark me as anything special. The referee, a stern-faced woman with a whistle around her neck, stepped between us. "Begin," she said, blowing the whistle sharp and quick. Joon moved first, feinting left then striking right. I let him land that one, feeling the sting of his knuckles against my cheekbone. The crowd murmured, leaning forward in their seats. I touched my tongue to the cut on my lip, tasted blood, and smiled. Round 2, Joon came at me with a flurry of kicks. I blocked most, letting him get close enough to score a hit to my ribs. It hurt, but it was worth it to see the satisfaction in his eyes. The crowd was into it now, cheering and jeering like they were at a fight club. For the third exchange, I decided to give Joon something real to work with. I threw a slow punch, telegraphing it clear as day. Joon's eyes lit up, and he sidestepped it easily, scoring another point. The referee blew her whistle, calling it for him. B1 versus B3, she announced. B1 wins on points 3-2. The crowd groaned, a collective sigh of disappointment. They'd been hoping for a show, not a technical knockout. Joon soaked up the attention, posing for the cameras like he was already a legend. I walked off the mat, ignoring the stares and whispers, and made my way to the locker room. The door slammed shut behind me, muffling the noise from the arena. I leaned against the bench, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My bag sat there unassuming, like it held nothing more than gym clothes and a water bottle. But it was more than that. It was a shield, a reminder of who I really was, what I could really do. And now, the system knew too. As if on cue, the overlay flickered to life in front of me. Internal note, underperformance logged. Real ability concealed at 9.4% of capacity. I smiled, running a hand through my sweat-dampened hair. The system knew all right. It knew I was playing it safe, concealing my real power. And for now, that was enough. The noise from the arena seemed far away now, like it was happening in another world. In this one, there was just me, my bag, and the knowledge that I'd won the match, even if it wasn't the way they'd expected. Joon got his moment. I got out clean. My father picked a Korean barbecue place neither of us had ever been to before. I stepped off the bus, the street still damp from last night's rain. I had chosen the slower route on purpose. The restaurant was 5 blocks away, and I walked them slowly, hands in pockets, collar up against the chill. The place hadn't changed since Mom used to drag us here for birthdays. The neon sign still buzzed softly, the red characters glowing like a beacon from across the street. I pushed through the doors, the warmth hitting me immediately, carrying with it the familiar scent of garlic and oil. I hung my coat on one of the hooks by the door and made my way to the lobby, avoiding the eyes of the hostess who recognized me but didn't say anything. I picked up a laminated menu, running my fingers over the smooth plastic, tracing the lines of text without reading them. 15 minutes early, just like Dad had taught me. Always be punctual, Min. It's the mark of a true professional. I could hear his voice in my head, clear as day. I wondered if he still sounded the same after all this time. The door chimed behind me, and I didn't have to turn around to know it was him. I could feel it, the way you can feel the air change when someone important walks into a room. I put down the menu, took a deep breath, and turned to face him. He looked older, the lines on his face were deeper, the hair at his temples grayer. He had lost weight too, his shoulders less broad beneath the familiar black suit, but his eyes were clear, steady, in a way they hadn't been since Mom. We greeted each other with a half handshake, half hug that caught me by surprise. I couldn't remember who had initiated it, and it didn't matter. We were here now together after all this time. We sat down at the table, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. The waiter took our order, his pen scratching against the pad as he wrote down our choices. Dad ordered the bulgogi, I ordered the bibimbap. When the waiter left, we were alone again, the silence heavier now, filled with all the things unsaid. The grill sizzled to life in the kitchen, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet of our table. Dad looked at me then, his eyes holding mine for a moment before he spoke. "It's good to see you, Min." His voice was steady, but I could hear the catch underneath it all. And just like that, we were back on solid ground, not quite where we'd left off, but close enough for now. The meat sizzled on the grill, the familiar sound filling the silence between Min and his father. It was unnerving how much it sounded like Mother's grilling. Father held the scissors at that same angle she always had, the blades clicking shut with a finality that seemed to echo through the years. Min looked down at his rice, unable to watch any longer. His chopsticks hovered over the bowl, unused. He felt the weight of Father's gaze on him, but he couldn't meet it. Father cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "I haven't been a father since your mother got sick." Min nodded, still staring at his rice. "No, you haven't." His voice was steady, despite the turmoil inside him. Father sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Min. I know that's not how this works, but I wanted you to know I've been sober for 8 months now." Min finally looked up, meeting Father's gaze. "That's good," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Father reached out, hesitating before placing his hand over Min's on the table. Min didn't pull away. It was the closest they'd come to touching in years. "I saw you on the news," Father continued, retracting his hand. "You looked different." Min shrugged. "I guess I am, in a way." He pushed around the food on his plate, not meeting Father's gaze. "It's been a lot." Father nodded, understanding more than Min could express. "Are you all right?" Min hesitated before answering. "I think so," he said finally, looking up at Father with a small smile. "Or at least I will be." They ate in silence after that, the tension between them slowly dissipating with each bite. When they were finished, Min stood up to clear the dishes. Father stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I'll get it," he said, standing up himself. "You go on ahead." Min nodded, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. He paused at the door, looking back at Father, who was already washing the dishes, his back to Min. "I'll see you around, Father," Min said softly, stepping out into the cool evening air. Father turned around, a small smile on his lips. "Yes," he agreed, "you will." The door closed behind Min, leaving Father alone in the kitchen with the sound of running water and the faint scent of grill smoke still lingering in the air. As Min walked home, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a notification from the system, "New encrypted communication detected." He looked up at the darkening sky, a faint smile playing on his lips. It seemed the bureau wasn't done with him yet, and neither was he with them. I walked along the river, the cool air brushing against my face. The afternoon sun glinted off the water, creating a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow. I had taken the long way home from the restaurant, needing the time to process the lunch with Dad. It was quieter than I'd expected, but then again, we hadn't exactly been bursting with conversation since Mom passed. My pocket buzzed. I pulled out my phone, expecting a message from Joon or maybe even one of my old friends checking in on me after hearing about the spa. But the screen was blank. Instead, the overlay flickered to life. +10 INT, encrypted. I blinked, surprised. Encrypted notifications were rare, but 2 in one day. I tucked my phone away and continued walking. Another buzz, another notification. +10 SDR, encrypted. What was going on? I picked up my pace, the crunch of gravel underfoot matching the rhythm of my thoughts. This was unprecedented. Encrypted notifications were typically spread out over days, sometimes weeks. But here I was, walking along the river on a Sunday afternoon, racking them up like I was leveling in some game. +1 INT, encrypted. +5 SDR, encrypted. I counted each notification as it came in. By the time I turned away from the river and towards my apartment building, 11 notifications had piled up in my overlay. I stood there for a moment, staring at the stack of messages. Each one represented something, but what? I couldn't access them directly. They were encrypted, hidden behind walls that even my high INT score couldn't breach. I made a mental note to investigate once I was home. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet, and neither was I with whatever this was. I approached my apartment door, the familiar worn-out welcome mat greet me like an old friend, but today there was no sense of relief, no feeling of home. Instead, there was a buzzing in my pocket and a stack of encrypted notifications waiting for answers. I sat down at my kitchen table, the wooden chair creaking under me like an old friend protesting the weight it had to bear again. The 2 phones and my laptop were laid out before me, a triad of screens ready for their morning ritual of information overload. The stack of encrypted notifications was still there, taunting me with its numbers. I clicked through them, each one adding +10 to my dex, bringing it closer to that 250 mark I'd set for myself. But the spike yesterday had been too much to ignore, and now I needed answers. I opened the Bureau's public hunter activity log, scrolling through rows of timestamps and location data. Nothing unusual stood out. No mention of a sudden burst of activity around the time of my spa with Joon or the lunch with my father. Frustrated, I leaned back in my chair, the creak now more like a sigh. Then an idea struck me. If the public logs weren't giving me what I needed, maybe it was time to go straight to the source. The Bureau's developer API wasn't exactly hidden, but it wasn't something they advertised either. It took some digging and a few attempts at deciphering their cryptic documentation, but eventually I managed to connect my laptop to it. The internal staff communication system came up on the screen, a labyrinth of encrypted channels waiting to be navigated. I set my laptop to monitor the traffic on those channels, filtering for spikes in activity. It was slow going at first, my INT working overtime to make sense of the data streams. Then, there it was, a sharp spike at 2:23 p.m. on Friday, 3 minutes after my spa match ended. My heart quickened as I cross-referenced the timestamps with my notifications. They aligned perfectly. The Bureau's staff had been talking about me, and the system had been rewarding me for it. I couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. Here they were, unwittingly helping me grow stronger while trying to figure out why I was hiding my true grade from them. It was almost funny. I found another spike, this one occurring yesterday morning at 10:27 a.m., 3 minutes after my name had been logged at the restaurant where I'd met my father. They were tracking me via cell tower data, it seemed. My dex ticked up another +10 as I watched the notifications roll in. I was getting closer to that 250 mark with each encrypted message they sent about me. But for now, I was content to let them talk. I closed my laptop, the screen fading to black like a curtain falling at the end of an act. And then, unexpectedly, I laughed. A single, short laugh that I cut off as soon as it started. It wasn't funny, not really, not when you considered what was at stake, but still, there was something absurdly satisfying about it all. The Bureau thought they were onto something, tracking me, discussing me in hushed tones behind encrypted channels. And here I was, sitting in my kitchen, growing stronger with every word they said. It was a strange kind of power, this ability to turn their suspicions into my strength. But then again, stranger things had happened since the system arrived. I picked up the bent spoon from where it lay on the table, turning it over in my hands. The metal was cool against my fingers, grounding me in reality even as my thoughts spun with possibilities. Then I put the spoon down and got ready for another day of waiting, watching, and growing stronger, one encrypted notification at a time. I sank into my couch, Sunday evening stretching out before me like a familiar, worn-out map. The city lights flickered through my window, casting long shadows across my apartment. I picked up the spoon from earlier, turning it over in my hands. It was just an ordinary spoon, but it had become something more, a symbol of my growth, of the strength that had been building within me. I looked at my stats, displayed in the corner of my vision by the system's steady glow. SDR 345/Dex 210/Con 158/INT 240/WIS 148/CHA. My strength had grown, but it was my intelligence that had truly soared. I hadn't felt this alive, this aware, in years. The system overlay rolled again, a new line appearing, cycle understood. New strategic mode available, passive growth, continue. I didn't hesitate. Continue, I said, feeling a sense of purpose settle over me like a comfortable, familiar blanket. The Bureau thought they were watching me, studying me, but little did they know it was me who was truly observing them. Every encrypted notification, every whispered conversation about my progress, it all fed into me, growing me stronger. I put the spoon down and leaned back against the cushions. The lamp cast a warm glow over my apartment, turning the mundane into something almost comforting. The city outside hummed with its usual cacophony, but here, in this moment, there was only silence. And in that silence, I waited, ready for whatever came next. The phone lay on the coffee table, silent and still. It wouldn't buzz tonight, not with encrypted notifications, not yet, but it would soon enough, because they were watching me, and every glance, every whisper, every encrypted message was another step towards my goal, towards becoming something more than I had been. I closed my eyes, the city lights still dancing behind my eyelids. Tomorrow was a new day, a day of waiting, watching, and growing stronger. And with that thought, I let sleep take me, ready to face whatever came next. I was being grown by the people watching me. The more they noticed, the stronger I got. The mass spawn alert came in at 4:07 on a Wednesday afternoon. I felt my pocket vibrate as I was logging off my last ticket for the afternoon. The Bureau alert had a unique rhythm, distinct from any normal notification. Bureau alert, Tier 4 portal active, downtown core, casualties imminent. All registered hunters above B rank requested. My colleagues around me were still engrossed in their headsets, but Director Lee looked up from his desk by the window. He was staring at his phone, brows furrowed. I knew he'd seen the public alert, not ours. The office chatter died down as everyone turned towards the windows. A column of smoke rose from downtown, stark against the clear afternoon sky. It was too close for comfort. My second monitor switched to live news footage without me touching it. The Bureau must have overridden my settings. Hundreds of creatures swarmed through a cracked-open portal, their forms shifting and twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed. S-rank response team delayed by separate breach in financial district. ETA 17 minutes. I leaned back in my chair, eyes flicking between the news feed and the spreadsheet open on my primary monitor. I knew the math cold. At the rate those things were spreading, in 17 minutes, there'd be approximately 200 to 400 civilian deaths. I ran the numbers again just to be sure. The totals didn't change. My colleagues started murmuring amongst themselves, pointing at the screen. Director Lee stood up, pacing towards the window. "We should evacuate," he said, more to himself than anyone else, but there was nowhere for us to go. Downtown was our backyard. I felt a familiar itch under my skin, like static building before a storm. My stats had been creeping up lately, encrypted gains from the Bureau's attention. SDR 425, Dex 180, Con 140, Int 240, Wise 130, Char 0. I hadn't accepted my class yet, but it didn't matter. Not today. I stood up, the chair rolling back behind me. Everyone looked at me. Director Lee opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. 14 minutes, I said, looking him straight in the eye. Then I walked out of the office, leaving my headset and monitors behind. It was time to go to work. I pushed through the revolving doors, the glass clicking into place behind me with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. The streets outside were a stark contrast to the sterile hum of the office. Sirens wailed in the distance, punctuated by the occasional scream, and the smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. I started walking east, towards the breach, the weight of my decision settling onto my shoulders like an old friend. The sidewalks were a river of people moving against me, eyes wide with fear and faces pale. I moved with them, but not among them. My pace was faster than theirs, my purpose different. The system had chosen me for this, whether I liked it or not, and I wasn't about to run now. 11 floors of stairs separated me from the street level, and I took them at a clip that left my heart pounding in my ears. By the time I reached the bottom, my muscles were warm and my breath steady. The system registered my increased heart rate, flashing +1 SDR across my vision as I stepped out onto the pavement. Hyo-jin watched me go from behind her desk, her dark eyes reflecting the chaos unfolding outside. She didn't try to stop me. Instead, she nodded once, a small jerk of her chin that spoke volumes. It said, "I see you, and good luck." I returned the nod, the weight on my shoulders shifting slightly, becoming more bearable. The streets emptied as I approached the breach perimeter, 3 blocks of devastation stretching out before me. Buildings lay in ruins, their once pristine facades now marred by cracks and holes. Smoke billowed from some, flames licking at others. People huddled in doorways or crouched behind makeshift barriers, eyes wide with terror as they watched the monsters tear through their city. I stopped at the edge of the perimeter, the system rolling an overlay across my vision, cover required, recommend full output. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Yes," I said aloud, my voice steady despite the butterflies churning in my stomach. It was time to go to work. The breach perimeter was a cacophony of shattered glass and twisted metal. Smoke hung heavy in the air, thick enough to taste, laced with the copper tang of spilled blood. Screams echoed from every direction, punctuating the symphony of chaos. I stepped into it, my boots crunching on the debris. A Tier 3 creature, a writhing mass of barbed tendrils and snapping jaws, was tearing through a group of civilians huddled behind a toppled-over car. They were unarmed, their faces etched with terror. My heart pounded in my chest, but my steps were steady, purposeful. +10 SDR, encrypted. The first creature fell under my onslaught before the civilians even realized I was there. The second didn't fare any better, its body collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. The third lunged at me, but it might as well have been moving through molasses. My fist connected with its central mass, and it exploded into a cloud of pixelated particles. Skill unlocked, field of engagement, passive LV, 1, combat awareness in 360-degree radius. The world shifted around me, my perception expanding to take in every shadow, every movement within my radius. It was like seeing the city through a new pair of eyes, every detail crystal clear and immediate. I moved on, each step bringing me closer to the portal's maw. The creatures didn't stand a chance. They came at me from all angles, but I was always there to intercept them, always one step ahead thanks to my new skill. With each kill, the system rewarded me with more strength. +10 SDR, encrypted. +10 SDR, encrypted. The notifications flashed across my vision like a ticker tape parade, but I barely registered them. My focus was on the fight, on the rhythm of the battle, the ebb and flow of combat. It was intoxicating, this power, this control. Suddenly, there were no more creatures between me and the portal. The breach had been contained, at least temporarily. I stood at the edge of the abyss, looking into the swirling vortex within. This was where they were coming from, these monsters that sought to consume our world. A news camera found me then, its bright light illuminating my sweat-soaked face and blood-spattered clothes. But I didn't notice. All I saw was the portal, all I felt was the pull of battle, the call to dive in and cleanse it from our world once and for all. I reached out with my right hand, fingers splayed wide, and gripped the shimmering edge of the portal. The air around it felt like ice on my skin, but I didn't let go. The system's warning flashed across my vision, but I'd taken worse warnings in my time. The portal resisted at first, then with a sudden give, it began to shrink inward. I twisted my wrist, and the shimmering edge buckled under my grip. The thunderclap echoed off the surrounding buildings, drowning out the distant wails of sirens and screams. I stepped back as the last of the portal collapsed in on itself, leaving behind nothing but empty air where a moment ago monsters had been pouring forth. The plaza was silent, except for the occasional groan of crushed concrete settling under the weight of the dead creatures. Footsteps approached from behind me. I turned to find three figures dressed in tactical gear, weapons holstered at their sides. In the middle stood the Lightbringer himself, his eyes scanning the carnage before settling on me. He looked young, barely older than I was, but there was an aura of power around him that commanded respect. "You closed it," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos we'd just witnessed. I shrugged, hands still clenched into fists at my sides. It was closing on its own. His gaze didn't waver. How? I twisted. I held up my hand, showing him the glistening portal residue coating my fingers. It had been stupid, reckless even, but it had worked. The Lightbringer's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment I thought he might press further. But then he nodded, just once, and stepped aside to let his team move in. They began setting up containment fields around the corpses, preparing for transport back to the bureau for analysis. I walked past them without a word, making my way towards the cordon where emergency personnel were tending to the injured and evacuating civilians. Behind me, I could hear the Lightbringer giving orders, his voice calm and assured despite the mess we'd made of downtown. As I reached the edge of the plaza, I glanced back over my shoulder. The Lightbringer was watching me again, his expression thoughtful. I held his gaze for a moment before turning away, disappearing into the crowd as another portal alert flashed across my vision. New mission received, monster cleanup crew. +10 decks, emergency evac. Total decks, 250. I ignored the notifications, focusing instead on the task at hand. The plaza might be cleared, but there were still hundreds of monsters loose in downtown, and it was up to me to make sure they didn't cause any more harm than they already had. But that, as they say, is another story. I walked home through streets littered with debris and monster parts, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The city felt different now, as if it held its breath waiting for what came next. I reached my apartment building at 6 p.m. sharp. The usually bustling lobby was empty save for an elderly neighbor who looked up from her knitting long enough to give me a nod. My apartment was dark, the curtains still drawn from this morning. I flicked on the light switch, and the room jumped into existence around me. The TV in the corner flickered to life with my face plastered across every channel. I hit the power button, plunging the room back into silence. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a constant stream of notifications that hadn't stopped since I left the plaza. 400 missed calls, 24 texts, and countless emails flooded my inbox. Joon had tweeted something about heroism, Yuna Cho had sent an email with the subject line, "We need to talk," and the bureau had reached out 3 times already. The Lightbringer himself had even taken the time to pen me a personal message. I ignored them all, pulling out the bent spoon from the kitchen drawer instead. It felt cold in my hand, the metal smooth under my thumb as I turned it over. The system overlay rolled out a new line, Bureau grade reassessment in progress. Estimated new rank, SS borderline, real grade, still pinned. I sat down on the couch, the bent spoon still clutched in my hand. Through the window, I could see the city skyline, the buildings standing tall and defiant against the setting sun. It was a view I'd seen 1,000 times before, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt like mine. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't answer my phone. I just sat there in the twilight, a bent spoon in one hand and the weight of a city on the other. And for the first time since all this started, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The internet was on fire. My phone stayed silent in my pocket. I was still hungry for the next buzz. I had 19 unread emails from foreign agencies by 8 in the morning Thursday. I stood in my kitchen, toast in one hand, personal phone in the other. 19 emails waited, their subject lines promising everything from recruitment to citizenship. I scanned them quickly, deleting each as I went along. I didn't recognize some of the senders, their emails a jumble of unfamiliar alphabets and symbols. But the message was clear: they wanted me. I was an asset now, a commodity to be traded across borders. I finished my toast, wiped my hands on my pants, and hit empty trash. 19 offers gone in an instant. Then another email arrived. Subject line: Bureau Field Liaison, Park Junho. It was from a Bureau internal address, asking me to come in this afternoon for a standard post-intervention debrief. I replied, confirming the time, 3 p.m., I'd be there. Grabbing my work phone and headset, I left for the office. Another day, another shift. The world might have changed overnight, but some things stayed the same. Like the weight of my commute, the familiar clack of the train's doors closing behind me, and me still just Min Park, heading to work. The address in the email led me to a different office complex, 2 blocks off from where I'd been last week. The building was taller, glacier, with a revolving door that spun too fast for my liking. I almost turned back, but the receptionist greeted me by name before I could make up my mind. Min Park, she smiled, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. We've been expecting you. This way, please. She led me to a conference room on the 7th floor. 3 men in dark suits sat around a rectangular table, each with a bureau lanyard hanging against their chests. None of them were Park Junho. Min Park, one of them said, extending a hand. We're glad you could make it. I didn't catch his name, nor the others. They blurred into a chorus of introductions, and I was left with 3 faces and no names to attach to them. I sat down at the far end of the table, leaving 2 empty chairs between us. The questioning started innocuously enough. What happened yesterday? Did I feel any unusual stat fluctuations during combat? How did it feel when my stats spiked? I answered each question calmly, my mind ticking through the minutes. 7 minutes in, I noticed the lanyards. The real bureau ID had a QR code on the back for building access. These didn't. 8 minutes passed. They asked about my class acceptance. I told them about the system's silence since I deferred my choice. They exchanged glances but said nothing. At 11 minutes, one of them leaned forward. Min, would you be willing to come with us for a more thorough examination? We have a specialized facility about an hour's drive away. Whose facility? I asked. The Bureau's, he replied promptly. What's the official Bureau facility name? I pressed, watching his eyes flicker. He hesitated for 2 seconds too long. Ministry of Defense, he said finally, but it was wrong. The real Bureau facility was called the Agency for Systemic Response. I stood up abruptly, scraping my chair back. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I'll be leaving now. Their eyes widened, surprise etched on their faces. But they made no move to stop me as I walked out of the conference room, leaving behind 3 men and their fake bureau lanyards. I stood, pushing my chair back with a deliberate scrape against the linoleum. I'd like to make a call first, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. They exchanged glances, surprise flickering across their faces, but nodded nonetheless. Of course, Min, one of them replied, too casually for it to be genuine. I walked to the far corner of the room, pulling out my phone as I did so. The direct line to the bureau was already saved in my contacts. I dialed, putting the phone to my ear. "Bureau of Hunter Affairs, how may I assist you today?" came the familiar voice of the receptionist. "This is registered Hunter Min Park," I began, keeping my voice low enough for the men to strain to hear me. "I'm being interviewed at an address that may not be bureau-affiliated. I'd like a bureau team to come verify." I rattled off the address, ending the call before they could respond. The men were on their feet now, hands reaching into their jackets. I didn't wait to see what they were grasping for. "Stay seated," I said quietly, projecting all the authority my composure skill and current stats would allow. They froze, 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I walked past them, out of the conference room, and into the lobby. The receptionist tried to intercept me, her hands reaching out, but I was faster. I moved around her at full speed, leaving her grasping at empty air. As I stepped out onto the street, the cool evening air hit my face, a stark contrast to the tension inside. I took a deep breath, checking my stats as I did so. SDR 480/Dex 300/Con 225/INT 340/WIS 210/CHA0. The night was still young, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to end quietly, but for now I was out, and that was enough. I stood on the sidewalk, hands in pockets, watching traffic flow around me like blood through veins. 9 minutes after I hung up with Junho, 2 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. No bureau logos, no markings at all, but I knew who they were. The doors opened, and hunters spilled out, tactical gear glinting under the harsh streetlights. Junho got out of the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. He looked tired, his usually neat hair disheveled, a crease between his brows that spoke more of worry than anger. He walked towards me, his boots clicking on the pavement. "Min," he said, stopping in front of me, "they are not affiliated with us." I raised an eyebrow, I gathered. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you injured?" "Nope." I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, watching his team disappear into the building. "Didn't get that far." He nodded, seemed about to say something else, then changed his mind. "Stay here," he said instead. "We'll be back." I watched him walk away, his shoulders squared, his head held high despite the late hour and the weight of whatever this new threat meant for us all. 15 minutes later, Junho reappeared, 3 men in cuffs being led out by his team. He walked over to me, stopping close enough that I could see the fatigue etched into the corners of his eyes. "This is the second category we warned you about," he said, his voice low. "We're going to assign you a discreet escort starting tomorrow." I bristled at the idea, but knew better than to argue now, not with 3 foreign agents in custody and who knows what other threats lurking in the shadows. So I kept my mouth shut and let him put a hand briefly on my shoulder before turning away. As he walked back towards the vehicles, I pulled out my phone, typing out a message to Junho's team lead. 3 agents apprehended. No engagement required. Min is fine. Then I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked up at the sky, wondering what new challenges tomorrow would bring. But for now, I was out, and that was enough. I sat on my couch, the weight of the day pressing down on me like a physical force. The city lights blinked on outside my window, one by one, as if signaling the end of another ordinary day for everyone else. But nothing about today had been ordinary. My phone buzzed with a message from hyo-jin. "Holy shit," it read. I managed a small smile that about summed it up. The system chose that moment to chime in, threat profile elevated. Recommend acceptance of operator class for active defensive capabilities. Defer, YN. I sighed internally, my gaze flicking from the spoon bent nearly in half on the coffee table to the phone in my hand. "Defer," I replied automatically. "Deferral count, 7 system note, cannot defer further without consequence." 7 times now I'd put off accepting my class. The system's patience seemed endless, but mine was wearing thin. I rubbed at the dull ache behind my eyes, feeling a sudden urge to bend something else, preferably with my hands, not just my stats. I leaned back into the cushions, letting my head loll against the worn fabric. My dad had texted earlier, asking if I was okay. I'd told him yes, because what else could I say? I wasn't okay, not really, but it wasn't like he could fix this for me. Yuna Cho's email still sat unopened in my inbox. Her offer to join a private guild hung there like a lifeline, but every time I thought about taking her up on it, something inside me rebelled. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear. Either way, I couldn't see myself signing away my freedom for some guild's protection. The spoon caught the light as I picked it up, its bent form casting a warped shadow onto the tabletop. It seemed fitting somehow, this twisted little piece of metal that had become a symbol of my life now. I closed my hand around it, feeling the cool smoothness of the bend under my thumb. Out there in the city, people were watching me, waiting for something, maybe another chance to grab me off the street, maybe just to see what I'd do next. But here on my couch, with the city lights winking at me through my window and the bent spoon warm in my hand, I was still me. Just Min Park, sitting quietly in his apartment, not quite ready to face whatever came next. But for now, that was enough. I would have to choose the class soon. I did not want to. Hyo-jin called me at 9:17 on a Saturday morning. I sat on my couch, watching the butter melt into the grooves of my toast. The phone rang, a harsh sound that grated against the morning quiet. It was Hyo-jin, her voice steady but tight. "Min," she said, "there's a dungeon in Gunpo." "Tia?" I asked, putting down the toast. Her voice was calm, too calm. "My parents live there, they're not answering their phones." I got up and moved to the kitchen counter where my phone lay face down. "Address." She gave it to me. "Min, the bureau says 12 minutes. The neighborhood will be inside by then." "I'll get there in 8. I hung up, leaving no room for argument. The toast was forgotten as I slipped on my coat and grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door. As I opened it, Sungwoo, my A-rank escort since yesterday, stood in the hallway. He looked at me with a mix of concern and respect. "Min SSI," he started, but I cut him off with a sharp glance. "Not now, Sungwoo." I walked past him towards the elevator, my mind already on Gunpo. The numbers were clear in my head: SDR 480, Dex 300, Con 225. It was time to put them to use. I walked past Sungwoo, his stun rod crackling to life too late. He grabbed my arm, the jolt meant for me just a nuisance to him. I could feel his surprise, the tension in his grip as he realized it wasn't going to work. "Where are you going?" he asked again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Gunpo Dungeon," I replied, not slowing down. "That's an S-rank," he said, falling into step beside me. "Your B-rank registered, Bureau policy says." "My friend's parents are inside." I cut him off, reaching the stairs. His hand fell away from my arm as if he'd only just noticed it was there. "I have to call this in," Sungwoo insisted, but his heart wasn't in it. He knew as well as I did that by the time anyone got here, the dungeon would have swallowed another block. "Call it in," I agreed, starting down the stairs at a pace that should have been impossible for me. But my con was up there now, and I felt great. Sungwoo grabbed my arm again, this time with his free hand. "They'll fire me." I looked at him over my shoulder. "Tell them I overpowered you." I did. And then I was gone, leaving him standing there with his stun rod pointed at nothing. I hit the street running, and it felt good. My SDR propelled me forward, each step eating up meters of pavement. Cars honked, people shouted, but all I heard was the wind in my ears. I was a freight train, unstoppable, and Gunpo Dungeon was my destination. The city blurred past me, a streak of concrete and steel. The system updated my stats as I ran, plus 10 SDR, running speed, 35 mph. I felt it in every cell, the power coursing through me like electricity. This was what I'd been training for, what I'd fought for, and now, finally, I was using it. I didn't look back as I left the city limits behind. There was no need. Sungwoo could call it in all he wanted, but I was already gone. I stepped into the shadow of Gunpo, the dungeon's edge lapping at the edges of the neighborhood like a slow tide. The once quiet suburban street was now a smoldering ruin, tilted and distorted by some unseen force. Smoke hung heavy in the air, carrying with it the scent of charred wood and something else, something metallic and acrid. The bureau hunters at the cordon line watched me warily as I approached. A commander stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "You can't enter, this is." I showed him my phone, hyo-jin's message still glowing on the screen. "My friend's parents are at this address." He hesitated, his gaze flicking between me and the encroaching dungeon. Then he stepped aside, his hand dropping to his side. I walked past without another word. The shadow enveloped me completely, and the world shifted. The once familiar streets of Gunpo were now twisted and alien, the houses leaning at impossible angles, their walls sprouting fangs and claws. Monsters filled the air, Tier 3 and -4 creatures swarming like flies around a few remaining civilians. I moved through them with practiced ease, my body responding to threats before I even registered them consciously. My SDR was up to 480 now, my dex at 300, enough that I could dodge most attacks without even trying. The system messages blurred by in the corner of my vision, a steady stream of notifications and stat gains that I barely registered. The house I was looking for was still partially intact, though one wall had collapsed entirely, revealing a bedroom upstairs where a figure huddled amidst the wreckage. Hyo-jin's parents' address, it had to be them. I moved towards it, my body weaving through the monsters with a mind of its own. They reached for me, their claws extended, but I was already gone, already moving past them, already focused on the figure upstairs. A wave of Tier 4 creatures surged forward as I approached the house, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. But they were too slow, they always were. I didn't hesitate, I didn't have time to. The first creature reached me, its claws extended, and then it was past, lying on the ground in pieces, its stats bleeding into my own. I broke the first Tier 3's neck without slowing my stride, its stats adding to mine like a digital toll booth. +2 SDR, total SDR 560. A Tier 4 lunged next, claws extended. I caught it mid-strike, redirecting its momentum into another of its kind. Both shattered, their combined stats boosting me further, +5 dex, encrypted, total dex 235. My movements sharpened, each strike precise, economical. A steel beam lay among the wreckage. I picked it up, swung it like a bat. 3 more creatures fell, their stats bleeding into mine, +8 SDR, total SDR 560. I reached hyo-jin's parents' house. The door was locked, but that was no obstacle. A kick, and it splintered inward. They were inside, huddled in the bathtub. Mother was praying, father silent but alert. "Stay here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." They nodded, clutching each other tighter. I left them there, moving outwards, clearing the surrounding blocks. 5 minutes turned into 7 as I worked through the creatures like a human wrecking ball. Skill, field of engagement, right arrow LV, 3 +10 SDR encrypted. Total SDR 560. The dungeon core loomed ahead, a pulsating orb of dark energy. I shattered it with a single strike. The dungeon groaned, its walls collapsing in on themselves like a dying beast. Dungeon collapse imminent. I stood in the wreckage, waiting for the bureau hunters to arrive. They poured onto the street, weapons drawn, eyes wide as they took in the destruction and me, standing at the epicenter. "Min," their leader breathed, lowering his weapon. "You did it." I looked down at my hands, still glowing with borrowed power. I had held back for weeks, but not anymore. Not now that hyo-jin's parents were safe. Skill unlocked. Suppression aura active LV 1. Lower tier creatures hesitate to approach. The street was silent, except for the distant sirens of emergency vehicles. The dungeon was gone, its creatures defeated, its core shattered, and I stood there, amidst the wreckage, finally ready to face whatever came next. Inbox state, 7 of 10, archived. I walked back to hyo-jin's parents' house, each step echoing in the sudden silence left by the dungeon's defeat. The door creaked open on hinges that had seen better days, revealing the bathtub where Mr. and Mrs. Kim huddled together, their eyes wide with shock but alive. I extended a hand to help them up. Mrs. Kim took it, her grip surprisingly firm despite her trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the Bureau's response team approaching. Her husband nodded at me, words still beyond him. I led them out of the house and towards the safety line where the Bureau teams were setting up. I handed them off to a nearby operator, their eyes meeting mine briefly before they turned their attention to the Kims. Mrs. Kim squeezed my hand one last time before letting go, her gratitude palpable in that single gesture. I nodded, stepping back to give them space. The line of safety stretched out in front of me, and there she was, hyo-jin, her face a mix of relief and anger as she took in the scene. She pushed past me without a word, drawn towards her parents like a moth to flame. I watched her go, my hands still damp from the bathtub's water. Hyo-jin reached her parents just as they were being ushered into one of the Bureau vans. The relief on their faces was visible even from where I stood. After they were secured inside, Hyo-jin turned back towards me, her eyes meeting mine for a moment before she walked over. She stopped in front of me, her shoulders squared, determination etched into every line of her body. "I am going to owe you for the rest of my life," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling beneath the surface. I shook my head, ready with a dismissive response, but she held up a hand, silencing me. "You don't have to say anything, Min. I know what this cost you, and I'll never forget it." She walked away then, leaving me standing there amidst the wreckage, my hands on my hips, a streak of monster blood still dark and wet on my sleeve. The Bureau team worked around me, their voices a steady hum of efficiency as they cleaned up the aftermath. But for now, all I could do was stand there, the weight of Hyo-jin's words heavy on my shoulders. Inbox state 6 of 10 archived. Inbox state 9 of 10 starred. The world had a new picture of me. I was going to have to choose, soon, what to do with it. 3 formal recruitment letters arrived at my apartment on Sunday by hand delivery. I woke Sunday morning to the hum of my apartment, the familiar drone of the fridge kicking on downstairs. The sun sliced through the gap in my curtains, landing on the envelope from yesterday's delivery. I'd been expecting something, but not 3 somethings. 3 padded envelopes lay on the lobby floor when I'd gone down for my mail. No names, just numbers, 1, 2, 3. They'd left them there, the couriers, no signature required. I'd brought them all upstairs, set them on the kitchen table with a thump. Letter 1 was from a US-based guild, private. They offered me a salary that made my eyes widen over my coffee mug, American citizenship too, and a security team. I poured myself another cup, the scent of coffee filling the air as I opened letter 2. The Korean Ministry of Hunter Affairs wanted me on their roster, immediate SS rank registration, state liaison position, a career in politics, if you could call it that. I set it next to the first, the weight of the offers settling into my shoulders like a lead coat. International organization, 3rd envelope, global response status, access to the network of S-ranks worldwide. They wanted me to be their eyes and ears, their hands in the field. 3 phone numbers stared up at me from 3 crisp sheets of paper. I reached for my phone, not to call any of them, but to check the time. It was early still, Sunday quiet. I had plans today, none of them involving conference calls or signing paperwork. The system beeped as I put my mug down, +1 SDR, a reminder of why they were all after me in the first place. I looked at the letters, then at my phone. No names, no numbers, just lines of code scrolling across the screen. I didn't need them to tell me what I already knew. I wasn't ready to be anyone's pawn yet, not even mine. Today was for something else. Today was for saying no. The phone rang twice before Cho picked up. Her voice was as crisp and efficient as I remembered from our first encounter. "Mr. Park." "I have 3 offers," I said, getting straight to the point. "I want to refuse all 3. I want them to leave me alone after." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she calculated the implications of my words. "That is not normally possible, Mr. Park," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm aware of that," I said, leaning back in my chair. but I'm willing to make it worth your while. Oh, her interest was piqued, and what might that be? A consulting retainer, I offered. 5 years, exclusive. You're the only scout I'll talk to during that time. There was another pause before she responded. And what exactly does this arrangement entail? I'll keep you informed about any offers that come my way, I explained. You'll have first refusal on any deals. In exchange, you'll make sure these organizations leave me alone until I'm ready to talk again. Yuna was silent for a moment before responding. I can make that happen, Mr. Park, but it won't be cheap. I didn't expect it to be, I said, a hint of dry humor creeping into my voice. Give me your terms. $1 million per year, paid quarterly, Yuna countered. And you'll sign a non-compete clause ensuring no other scout gets involved in your negotiations for the duration of our contract. I considered her proposal. It was a significant sum, but it was worth it to maintain my independence. Deal, I said. Excellent, Yuna's voice was smug with satisfaction. I'll have the paperwork sent over within the hour. Once you've signed and returned it, I'll start working on your situation. The call ended, and I placed the phone back on my desk. I had taken the first step towards asserting my agency in this new world of dungeons and power-ups. Now all I could do was wait for Yuna to work her magic. Notification received. Total SDR 620. I looked at the notification, a small smile playing on my lips. It seemed even refusing offers had its perks. But then again, nothing in this world came without some form of exchange. I just hoped I wasn't making a deal with the devil. The phone rang an hour later. Yuna was as good as her word. I picked up, ready to face whatever came next. The game of Pinged continued, and I was determined to play it on my terms. I picked up the phone, Yuna already patched into the line. Ready when you are, she said, her voice professional yet warm. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and dialed the first number. The call connected, and a gruff voice answered, "This is Agent Thompson." No pleasantries, straight to business. That suited me fine. Agent Thompson, this is Min Park, I began, my tone flat but polite. You've extended an offer for recruitment into the American Hunter Division. I'm calling to decline. There was a pause before he responded. You're making a mistake, kid. His voice held a hint of irritation, but I didn't rise to it. That's possible, I agreed calmly, but my decision stands. Yuna Lee will be handling any future communication regarding my services. I heard Yuna's voice come on the line, smooth and efficient, as she laid out our script. Mr. Park is a free agent and has retained me as exclusive scout. Further contact must go through me. He will not be available for negotiation in any form. There was a muttered curse from Thompson before he hung up. I didn't take it personally. The second call was to the Korean Ministry of Hunters. A stern voice greeted me. This is Minister Kim. We've been expecting your call, Mr. Park. His tone suggested that he expected me to accept their offer without question. I'm calling to decline your recruitment offer, I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. This was my country, after all, and turning them down wasn't easy. Kim's response was immediate. You are obligated under the Hunter Conscription Act to. Yuna cut him off, her voice firm yet respectful. He is exempt under the Independent Hunter Provision, Section 14B. He has filed paperwork this morning. There was a moment of silence before Kim replied, surprise clear in his voice. You filed paperwork. I could almost see him flipping through some mental ledger. Yuna confirmed, I filed paperwork. She didn't need to add that it was at my request and under my direction. That was implied in her tone. The third call was different. It was answered with a polite, UN Department of Paranormal Affairs, Representative Nakamura speaking. Representative Nakamura, I began, using his title to set the tone for our conversation. I'm calling to decline your recruitment offer. I didn't bother with any preamble this time. Nakamura responded with a calm, of course, Mr. Park, the offer stands if you change your mind. We'll wait. There was no disappointment in his voice, only understanding. Yuna took over again, reciting our script like it was second nature to her. Nakamura listened attentively before responding. "We understand, the colleague. You have our contact information should Mr. Park need it." As I hung up the phone after the last call, Yuna let out a sigh of relief. "That's that," she said, breaking into a smile that I could hear through her voice. "Well done, Min." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the 3 missed calls on my phone. I had made my stance clear. I was no one's recruit. I was Min Park, and I played pinged on my terms. I watched Yuna walk down the hall, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum. She didn't look back. I closed my door and leaned against it, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade away. The folder she'd left on my kitchen table lay untouched. I picked it up, flipped through the pages. Standard Scout retainer, a rev share clause tucked neatly into the fine print. 5 years of Yuna acting as my go-between, handling the logistics while I focused on what I did best. I grabbed a pen from the counter and signed where she'd marked with a red X. The ink dried quickly on the contract's cheap paper. I wasn't signing away my freedom, just giving myself some breathing room, a way to keep playing pinged without it consuming my life. I set the folder back down and checked my stats in the overlay. SDR 620/DEX, 400/con 305/INT, 445/WIS 280/CHA0. Numbers I knew by heart, but seeing them never got old. Not like they would if I took one of those recruitment offers. No thanks, I was my own team. Yuna's parting words echoed in my mind. "Why has it let you defer 8 times? Good question, one I didn't have an answer to, yet." I sat on my couch Sunday evening, the city quiet around me save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that danced across my apartment floor with every passing car. I had learned how to bring up the system overlay manually now. A focus here, a thought there, and it bloomed in my vision like a holographic screen. I scrolled through the menus until I found what I was looking for. Class, operator, deferral count, 8. Reason for deferral cap waiver, target identified. A new line caught my eye, one I'd never seen before. I focused on it, and it expanded. Recommended target, Tier 9 portal anomaly, projected to open within 14 days. Operator class confers necessary capability. I sat very still, the bent spoon in my hand growing warm from my grip. The system had been waiting for something. There was a Tier 9 portal coming, and it seemed the operator class was designed specifically for it. I could feel the weight of this new knowledge settling over me like a blanket, heavy but comforting in its familiarity. The spoon bent further under my fingers, metal creaking against metal until it snapped clean in two. I looked down at the broken pieces, then out the cracked window at the city below. It was quiet tonight, as if holding its breath for whatever was coming next. I had 14 days. The class assignment was no longer optional. The bureau called me at 3 in the morning. The phone buzzed me awake, its glow cutting through the darkness like a blade. It wasn't my usual alarm, but the emergency one Junho had programmed into it without asking. I sat up, heart already pounding. "Min," Junho's voice was grim. "Tier 9, Yongin region, opened 40 minutes ago." I swung my legs out of bed, reaching for clothes. Status. "The Lightbringer and 2 others, none have returned." He paused. "Portals expanding, 6 hours until it swallows the city." "I'm on my way," I said, pulling on a shirt. "We are asking this time, Min. We can't order you." I stepped into my shoes, tying them tight. "On my way, Junho." He didn't argue further. He knew better than that. I hung up, grabbing my bag from the closet. It was already packed, always ready for nights like these. The apartment door clicked shut behind me, echoing in the empty hallway. I jogged towards the stairwell, the familiar ache in my knees from years of climbing stairs out of breath. Not tonight, though. Tonight there was no breathlessness. The rooftop was cold and windy, but the bureau helicopter waited, rotors spinning. Pilot gave me a nod as I climbed in, strapping myself into the seat next to him. He didn't ask questions. He knew better than that, too. As we lifted off, the city lights blurred beneath us, a sea of neon and steel. Yongin was on the outskirts, but it wouldn't stay there for long if this kept up. I checked my phone again, no new notifications. The system wasn't saying anything yet, but it would. It always did. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes briefly. 6 hours. That was all we had. But then again, 6 hours was a lifetime when you were dealing with the system. I stared out the helicopter window, watching Seoul shrink beneath us until it was just another sprawling toy city on a too-big-for-me map. The pilot up front didn't say much, which suited me fine. I had my own conversation to deal with. The class prompt was still there, floating in my vision like an unwelcome guest at a party. Class evaluation, operator, accept YN final. Yes, I said, and the system responded as promptly as any overworked but underpaid customer service rep. Class assigned, operator. A waterfall of notifications cascaded down my visual field, each one unlocking a new skill, opening up fresh possibilities. Skills granted, system read active, combat triage passive LV, 5 throughput active, inbox access active. I took them all in, letting the information settle like sediment at the bottom of my mind. I could read the system now, really read it, not just parse the notifications it threw at me. I could route my own power, open and close data flows like a kid playing with their first remote control car. Inbox state auto-progressed to 10, INBOXCD. I blinked, looking away from the notifications and back out at the cityscape. Inboxed, apex tier. I was in uncharted territory now, and there was no map for where I was going. I stepped off the helicopter onto Yonggin's tarmac, my boots hitting the ground with a finality that echoed through me. Apex tier. The portal loomed before me like a vertical slash in reality, 50 feet tall and glowing with a faint green light. Bureau staff milled about, news crews vied for the best angle, government officials stood stiffly, and among them all, the Lightbringer's wife waited, her eyes downcast. But I didn't have time for any of that. I walked towards the portal, my strides purposeful, my gaze fixed. A bureau official tried to intercept me at the perimeter, a thick folder clutched to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Park," he started, but I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I'll figure it out," I said, and stepped into the portal before he could argue. Inside, there was no dungeon, just a long corridor of stone that stretched out before me, narrowing as it went. The walls were covered in writing, not any human language, but my INT parsed it anyway. Internal Review Chamber. Apex entities only beyond this point. I walked deeper into the corridor, the words scrolling past me like an endless ticker tape. They were system administrator's log, detailing system checks and balances, protocol enforcement, and something else, something about a glitch. The corridor narrowed further until I found myself in a space barely wide enough for my shoulders. Ahead of me, a sealed door barred my way, its surface smooth and unmarked except for a single line of text at eye level. Access granted upon verification. I reached out, placing my hand on the cool stone surface. The overlay flickered to life, casting the room in its cold blue light. Verification required. Please state your rank. I took a deep breath and spoke the words aloud, even though there was no one else here to hear them. "I am Operator Park Min," I said, my voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Rank Apex." I put my hand on the door. It was cold and smooth under my fingertips, but it responded instantly, a faint hum vibrating against my palm. Apex entity confirmed. Access granted. Welcome, Operator. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast circular chamber bathed in an eerie glow. The space was empty save for a low platform in the center, and on that platform lay the 3 SS-rank hunters who had entered before me. The Lightbringer, her silver hair splayed out around her like a halo, and 2 others I recognized from the Bureau's archives. They were alive but unconscious, their bodies completely still except for the gentle rise and fall of their chests. A thin, glowing thread connected each of them to the chamber's ceiling, pulsing with an otherworldly light. It took me only a moment to understand what was happening. They weren't prisoners, they were inputs. You took the longest of any of them. The voice echoed in my mind, not as a system message, but something else entirely. I hesitated before responding, feeling a strange sense of propriety in this silent, glowing place. "Who are you?" I thought back, willing the words into existence. "We'll speak properly soon," the voice replied, its tone neutral, almost amused. I stepped onto the platform, my boots sinking slightly into the soft material. The glow from the floor intensified as I approached the Lightbringer, casting her features in sharp relief. I reached out and grasped the glowing thread connecting her to the ceiling. It was warm, almost alive under my touch. With a single swift motion, I pulled it taut and severed it. The Lightbringer's body slumped onto the platform, her breath hitching slightly before evening out again. I did the same for the other two hunters, feeling each thread snap satisfyingly in my grasp. As the last thread fell away, the glow from the floor began to intensify, rising like a tide until it filled the chamber completely. The air hummed with energy, and I could feel something shifting, changing around me. "We can speak now," the voice said, its tone still neutral but somehow clearer, stronger. "Welcome to the entity's chamber, Operator Park Min." I was alone with whatever was speaking to me. It was not the system. I took a seat beside Lightbringer, her unconscious form slumped against me. The glowing thread disappeared into the ceiling, leaving us in dim light. A soft hum filled the chamber as a new presence took shape in the center of the room. It was humanoid, but neither male nor female, formed from pulsating colors like an aurora. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, the system's notification icon flashing briefly before fading. "Hello, Min Park," the entity said, its voice resonating around us yet seeming to come from nowhere in particular. I looked at it, taking in every detail. Around me, the other hunters lay unmoving, their presence a reminder of what we were up against. The chamber was quiet, save for the soft pulses of light that made up the entity. I waited, hands resting on my knees, eyes fixed on the being before me. This was it, the moment of truth in this forsaken place. I had questions. For the first time in my life, I had questions, and the person across from me would actually answer them. I waited for the entity to start talking. I stood on the chamber floor, the three unconscious SS ranks sprawled at my feet like fallen statues. The entity, a humanoid shape composed of shifting colors, hovered a few feet above the platform, its form as soft and fluid as mist. "You have many questions," it said, its voice resonating in my mind rather than through the air. I felt a ping plus one whiz, but I ignored it, focusing on the entity's words. "Why me?" I asked, my voice echoing in the chamber. "Because you were already invisible," it replied. "The role I'm offering requires someone who has been hollowed out before they took it. A man who is loved or seen would fail. A man who needs nothing from the world is fit." I processed its words, feeling another ping plus one INT as understanding clicked into place. "What is this role?" I asked. "To be the place all the notifications converge," it said. "To be the inbox of the world. Every awakened person on Earth grows because the system routes information about them through a single channel. Every system message, every encrypted gain, every oval, they all need a node to terminate at. A single living mind that absorbs the throughput. Right now, that is me. I am tired. I have done this for 200 years. I absorbed its words, feeling another ping plus one INT as the magnitude of what it was saying sank in. "You want me to take over?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Yes," it said, its form shifting into a posture that seemed almost expectant. It waited for my answer, the chamber silent except for the faint hum of the system. I sat on the cold stone floor of the Tier 9 chamber, my back against the wall where I'd leaned earlier. The entity loomed before me, its form shifting like liquid metal into a posture that seemed almost expectant. I pulled up my operator class view, the blue holographic interface floating in front of me. I'd never really looked at it before, not like this. Thousands upon thousands of channels flowed through it, each one representing an awakened person on the planet. Their stats, their skills, all funneling through the entity. "What does taking over cost?" I asked, my voice echoing in the chamber. The entity didn't seem surprised by my question. "You stop existing in the world," it said, its voice resonating with a bass undertone. "Your body remains here, in this chamber, indefinitely. Your consciousness becomes the routing point. You will feel everyone's notifications forever. Most of who you are will be consumed by the throughput." I let that sink in, feeling the weight of the entity's words. It was like being offered the world on a silver platter, but at the cost of everything I was. "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Then I continue," it replied. "For a while, but I am dying. When I die, the system fails. Every awakened person loses their power simultaneously. Civilians will be defenseless. The portals will overrun the world within a decade." I leaned my head back against the wall, closing my eyes briefly. It was like being trapped in a labyrinth with no clear exit. No matter which path I chose, someone got hurt. "So the choice is," I said, opening my eyes to look at the entity, me or everyone. That is the choice every operator has made for 200 years, it said, its form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. It is not an easy decision, but it is a necessary one. I stared at the entity, its form shifting like liquid silver under my gaze. Its words echoed in my mind, 200 years spent stabilizing an architecture I barely understood. But I knew what it meant to dismantle something complex, to reroute streams and redistribute throughput. I was good at that. What if I refuse? I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. What if instead of taking your role, I distribute the throughput? Operator class access can read and write the system. I can route the streams to no single node, multiple nodes, or none at all. The entity didn't move, but I felt a change in the air, like a sudden drop in temperature. You would have to dismantle what I have spent centuries building, it said, its voice echoing slightly. I know, I replied, meeting its gaze, but maybe that's what needs to happen. The entity seemed to consider this, its form rippling like water under moonlight. It would take weeks, it said finally. You would have to maintain the streams during the dismantling. You would have to take my role temporarily, knowing it ends when the rebuild is done. How long is temporarily? I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Months, possibly years, with a known end, the entity replied. And after the rebuild. Every awakened person grows on their own. The system becomes ambient, no single node, no operator. Why hasn't anyone done that before? I questioned, curiosity piqued despite the situation. The operator's role holds power, prestige, it feels important, a kind of meaning. The temptation to keep that meaning has been more than most could refuse, it explained. I scoffed internally at that. Meaning was a luxury I couldn't afford, not anymore. I am very good at refusing meaning, I said aloud, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. The entity laughed, a soft sound like distant thunder. It echoed around me, through me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. You are, it agreed, its form starting to shift again, this time towards me. That is why I picked you. I stood my ground as it moved closer, the air growing colder with each step it took. The entity was prepared to fight for its role, and so was I, but first, we had to understand each other's rules. And right now, it seemed like we were just getting started. As I stood there, the entity's form shimmered and changed color, like a hologram adjusting its settings. The chamber around us began to hum, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in my bones. The platform we were on started to glow brighter, the lights casting stark shadows that made the room feel more clinical, more sterile. You are choosing the third path, the entity said, its voice echoing slightly in the vibrating chamber. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Yes, I replied, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. I understand what that means. The entity's color shifted again, this time to a shade of blue that reminded me of stormy seas. You understand that during the transition, I will fight you, not because I want to, but because the system defenses will. They are designed to prevent operator transitions of this kind. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Understood, I said, my voice echoing in the chamber. The entity's color shifted again, this time to a shade of red that made me think of warning lights. I will be on your side, it said, its voice rising slightly over the hum of the chamber. The defenses will not. I know, I replied, feeling a strange calm wash over me. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss. You couldn't focus on the fear, you had to focus on the next step. Are you ready? The entity's voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify. Resignation, perhaps. No, I admitted, feeling a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth. But that is also not a reason to delay. As the words left my mouth, the chamber around us seemed to come alive. The lights brightened even further, casting everything in a harsh, white glare. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the air starting to vibrate against my skin. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the maw of a storm. And then, without warning, the system defenses began to activate. System online. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it. There was no turning back now. The hum grew louder as the walls of the chamber pulsed with an otherworldly glow. The geometric shapes began to peel off, each one hovering for a moment before surging forward in a synchronized swarm. I stood up, cracking my knuckles, and pulled my sleeves up. My heart pounded in my chest like a bass drum, but I welcomed it. It was familiar. This was my domain. The first security process reached me, its form shifting from an intricate cube to a menacing spiked sphere. It hummed with malicious intent, but I didn't flinch. I'd faced stranger threats in the digital realm. As it lunged, I reacted on instinct, my operator-class training kicking in. I dodged to the side, my hand shooting out to intercept its path. "Min," the entity's voice echoed behind me, "whatever happens, thank you." I glanced back briefly, meeting his gaze. "Don't thank me yet," I replied, turning my attention back to the swarm closing in around us. The chamber was alive with glowing shapes, and behind me lay the unconscious forms of the SS-rank hunters, their threads severed by my hands. This was it. No turning back now. I braced myself, ready for the onslaught, as the first security process rebounded off my interception and circled back around. The hum intensified, drowning out all other sounds except the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. The scene before me was a masterpiece of tension, and I stood at its epicenter, a lone figure prepared to defend his newfound purpose. The closing image was clear in my mind, me standing tall amidst the swirling chaos, hands raised, ready for the storm that was about to break upon us. Defense system engaged. Apex combat protocol active. The first of them came at me. The first wave of security processes hit me in the chamber 2 minutes after the entity warned me it would. I stood my ground as the glowing geometric entities, each the size of a compact car, hurtled towards me. Their hum resonated in my chest like an approaching thunderstorm. They moved fast, too fast for my eyes to track, but my body understood their rhythm now. Operator system engaged. The first one reached me, its sharp edges slicing through the air millimeters from my skin. I caught it with both hands, feeling the heat of its glowing planes against my palms. Analyzing structure, the system's overlay flickered in my vision, displaying a complex network of lines and nodes. Critical node located. I twisted, throwing the entity away from me as I struck at its core. Node dismantled, 1% complete. It shattered into a cascade of sparkling motes, leaving behind an empty space that quickly began to fill with new entities pouring out of the chamber walls. No time to waste. Editing system architecture, removing single-node dependency, 3% complete. The next entity came at me from above, its form shifting like liquid metal as it changed trajectory midair. I dropped into a roll, coming up beneath it. Critical node located. My fist crashed through its glowing underbelly, and the entity exploded into fragments that hung in the air for a moment before dissipating. Editing system architecture, 7% complete. I spun, lashing out at another entity closing in from my blind spot. Node dismantled. It dissolved into pixels, leaving behind a brief flash of code that I couldn't decipher but knew was vital to the system's function. Total STR 800. Around me, the entities seemed endless, their numbers constantly replenishing as more poured out of the walls. But I felt no fear, only a grim determination. This was it, the fight I'd been training for, and I would not fail. I moved like lightning, striking at one entity after another, reading their structures, dismantling them. Editing system architecture, 12% complete. And then, as suddenly as they had begun, the entities hesitated, their glowing forms flickering in place. A new message appeared in my overlay, secondary wave initializing. The walls of the chamber began to bulge and shift, ominous shapes forming within them. I stood amidst the wreckage of the first wave, breathing heavily but uninjured. Operator system engaged. I was ready for whatever came next, but before the second wave could break free, I had work to do. Editing system architecture. I braced for the second wave, but they were faster this time. They moved like they'd learned from my tactics, coordinated in a way that made me grit my teeth. Operator integrity 98%. The glow of their geometric forms seemed brighter, more intense. The first hit was a glancing blow across my ribs. I felt the skin open, but concealed it almost instantly, +1 con. I didn't have time to acknowledge the pain before they were at me again. Faster, the entity's voice echoed in my mind. You're at 47%, keep pushing. I knew what I had to do. I activated throughput, sending bursts of stat energy into clusters of processes, throughput active, SDR draining rapidly. The clusters flickered, overloaded by my stats, but it wasn't enough. They were adapting too fast. So I adapted with them. I unlocked field of engagement, reading the chamber 360 degrees, predicting their attack patterns. Field of engagement activated. Int drain detected. My vision filled with lines of projected paths, intersections, and probabilities. I dodged a direct hit by millimeters, but another process snuck in from behind. It connected with my left shoulder, a jarring impact that made me stumble. Operator integrity 95%. My shoulder dislocated, the pain sharp and immediate, but I'd fought through worse. I popped it back into place mid-stride and kept moving. The editing percentage climbed steadily, 41%, 47%. The chamber seemed to hum with tension as we all waited for that 50% mark. I could feel it in my bones, the shift in balance, the system's defenses crumbling under my relentless assault. But I wasn't there yet, not quite. I felt the chamber shift around me as I edged closer to 70% completion. The defense processes, once coordinated and swift, began to stutter. They'd lose their synchronization for a second before regaining it, like a song with a skipped beat. But they were slowing down, becoming more predictable. I could handle that. My body was a different story. I was running on fumes, my con high but my physical reserves depleted. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a conscious effort. But I couldn't stop. Not yet, not now. The entity's voice cut through the noise of my own labored breathing. 75%, you can do it. I know, I replied, my voice tight with concentration and exhaustion. The system overlays were running on autopilot now, each editing step happening without conscious direction from me. It was like watching a movie where I knew the script by heart. I could see what was coming, but couldn't intervene if I wanted to. The final stretch was a blur of neon lights and geometric shapes. They came at me faster than before, but I was ready. My SDR had been climbing steadily, each notification a boost of strength that pushed back against my fatigue. +1 SDR, 88%. +2 Dex, Encrypted, 91%. New skill, Keen Eye Passive, enhances visual perception during combat. LV, 1. I felt a surge of power with each notification, but it wasn't enough to mask the dull ache in my muscles or the pounding in my head. I pushed through it, driven by something deeper than pain or fatigue. The chamber's central column began to hum louder, its pulsating glow intensifying. The final defense process emerged from within it, larger and more menacing than anything before it. This was the system's last line of defense, its final attempt to repel me. It loomed over me, a silent challenge. I stood my ground, hands hovering over the controls, ready for whatever came next. But for now, this was where I drew the line. This was as far as I'd push myself before taking a moment to regroup, to catch my breath. The system's progress bar might be at 95%, but my body was at its limit. This was the calm before the storm, and I was ready for it. The last process loomed before me, 50 feet tall and glowing with geometric precision. An inverted pyramid, it pulsed with a steady rhythm that echoed my heartbeat. It was slower than its predecessors, but I could feel the weight of the system's final defense in its presence. I can't fight you head-on, I muttered, more to myself than to the entity floating beside me. Not like this. The entity didn't respond, just watched as I focused on the process. My operator class kicked in, and lines of code flooded my vision. I scanned them, searching for the core function. There it was, final routing node. I looked at the entity. If I destroy it, the shockwave will kill me. The entity's voice was calm, resigned. I will absorb the shockwave. It will end me. The system is already over for me. I have moments. No, I said, my voice firm. There has to be another way. There is not, the entity replied. You are not yet stable enough to take it. I understood. There was no other way. I took a deep breath and nodded. Thank you. Finish it, the entity whispered. I focused back on the node, my fingers moving in the air as if typing on an invisible keyboard. The lines of code blurred, shifted, and then nothing. The node flickered once, twice, and then dissolved into a cascade of glowing motes. 100%. System architecture rebuilt, ambient mode, no central node required. Operator class, retired, all capabilities now distributed. The chamber lights flared white, and the entity moved towards the forming shockwave. I tried to call out, to tell it not to go, but my voice was swallowed by the growing brilliance. The last thing I saw before the world turned white was the entity, calm and resolute, flying into the heart of the storm. Then everything went blank. I woke up on the cold floor, my head throbbing like a drum. The bright ambient light was gone, replaced by the dull glow of emergency lighting. I reached for my stats overlay, but found nothing, just the barren emptiness where my operator class used to be. I was bleeding from cuts on my arms and legs, but none seemed life-threatening. I pushed myself up, feeling every one of my 47 years in my bones. STR 800, that was new. New title, pinned. The 3 SS rank hunters were sprawled around me like discarded puppets. The Lightbringer stirred first, his eyes fluttering open to stare at me. He looked around the empty chamber, then back at me. "What happened?" he asked, his voice gruff from disuse. "I fixed it," I said, offering him a hand up. He took it, and I helped him to his feet. The other 2 hunters began to stir, groaning as they woke. The Lightbringer looked around again, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Fixed what?" "You'll see," I replied, turning towards the portal that had reappeared in the far wall. It pulsed with a familiar blue light, ready to take us back to reality. The chamber was fading around us, the walls disappearing into a soft mist. We stood there for a moment, the 4 of us, waiting for the others to wake. Then, as one, we turned and walked towards the portal, leaving the silence of the chamber behind. Exit initiated. The last thing I saw before stepping through was the Lightbringer's face, set in determination. We had made it through, but there were still battles left to fight, and we would need every ounce of strength we had left. We walked out together. The system was no longer a single node. It was ambient now, in everyone, the way it should have been. 6 weeks after the chamber, I woke up on a Monday morning and the system had stopped buzzing at me. I woke up to silence, the kind I hadn't known in months. No notifications flashing in my vision, no stats ticking up, just the soft hum of the city outside my window. For the first time since the system rebuild, I'd slept through the night without waking up to check my phone. My body felt different too. The tension that had been coiling in my muscles for what felt like years was gone. I rolled out of bed and stretched, feeling each movement with a clarity I hadn't experienced before. STR 800, Dex 530, Con 410, INT 590, WIS 380, CHA 0. The numbers were the same as yesterday and the day before that. It was strange but not unpleasant. I made coffee in my usual mug, the one with the chipped rim. The kitchen counter was clear except for the coffee maker and a single-dish soap bottle. No dungeon core to turn in for credit, no bent spoon to remind me of what had been, just normal. As I poured the coffee, I noticed the scent was stronger than usual. Richer. I took a sip, letting it sit on my tongue before swallowing. It tasted like victory, quiet and unassuming, but victory all the same. I got ready for work in the same way I had every day for 5 years. Shower, shave, dress. The only difference was the lack of system messages flashing in my periphery. No new skills unlocked, no stats gained, just me getting ready for another shift at the help desk. My phone buzzed as I slipped it into my pocket. A message from hyo-jin. "Morning, have a good day at work." I smiled. She was still dating that guy from marketing, but we were friends again, that was enough. I checked my stats one last time before leaving. STR 800, Dex 530, Con 410, INT 590, WIS 380. CHA 0. No change. I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping out into the world. Just another day at the office. And that was okay. I slipped into my cube, the fabric of my chair familiar against my legs. The headset was a reassuring weight as I adjusted it on my ears. The fluorescent light above flickered in its usual rhythm, casting a faint hum that barely registered anymore. Hyo-jin waved at me from her cube, her smile warm even through the phone pressed against her ear. Her hair was shorter now, skimming her shoulders instead of falling past them like before. It suited her, I thought, before turning to my own screen. The first call came in shortly after. A user's printer wasn't responding. I walked him through the troubleshooting steps, my voice calm and measured. I hung up, took a deep breath, and clicked on the next ticket. Another user had accidentally deleted their emails. I guided them through restoring from the recycle bin for remembering that particular trick. Director Lee appeared at the edge of my cube around 11. "Park," he said, "there's a memo coming about promotions. I want you on a senior track if you'll take it." I looked up at him, his face lined with years of management, but kind nonetheless. "I'll think about it," I replied, and he nodded, satisfied, before moving on to the next cube. The work felt different today. Not because it was easier, though some days were smoother than others, but because I was different. The constant hum of notifications had faded to a soft murmur. SDR 800/DEX 530/CON 410/INT 590/WIS 380/CHA0. I took another call, resolved it, and glanced at the clock. It was noon, time for lunch. I stood up, grabbing my coat and phone. As I walked away from my cube, I felt a sense of contentment settle over me. This was my life now, quiet, settled, comfortable in its familiarity, and that was okay. I sat on the bench across from Hyo-jin, watching her stab at her teriyaki chicken skewers with a plastic fork. The food truck behind us was busy as always, even on a Tuesday afternoon. The line snaked around the corner, but we'd timed it perfectly. Our order had just come up. "You're quiet today," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. Her hair was shorter now, styled in a sharp bob that framed her face. It suited her, made her look more like the hyo-jin I'd known before everything changed. "I'm eating," I replied, holding up my own skewers as evidence. The system hadn't updated me with any new stats since I last spoke to it 6 weeks ago. I was used to the silence now, found comfort in it. Hyo-jin rolled her eyes but smiled. "My boyfriend's less nervous about meeting you now," she said, changing the subject. She'd mentioned him last week, matter-of-factly, like she was talking about the weather. It hadn't bothered me then, and it didn't now. "I'm fine being met," I said, repeating her words from last week. Hyo-jin smiled, a small thing. She laughed, a sound that was both familiar and new. "He is nervous about meeting you," she insisted. "He likes my parents." "Then he should meet me," I said, taking another bite of my skewers. They were spicy today, hotter than usual. I welcomed the burn. Hyo-jin shook her head but didn't press further. She talked about her parents instead, about how they'd moved back to Gunpo after everything that happened, how the neighborhood was rebuilding, slow but steady, how it felt like a dungeon had never torn through their kitchen. We finished our skewers in comfortable silence, then walked back to the office together. The sun was warm on my face, and for once I didn't feel the urge to check my phone every 2 minutes. And that was okay. The fluorescent lights of the Korean barbecue restaurant hummed above us, casting their usual warm glow over the familiar tables. My father sat across from me, his eyes creased at the corners as he smiled, a sight I'd almost forgotten. 8 months sober now, 9 by next week. He looked healthier, easier in his body. We didn't talk about the chamber. We didn't need to. The news had done enough talking for both of us, and I was happy to leave it there. Instead, we talked about work, about Hyo-jin's new girlfriend, not me, she made sure to clarify, but someone else now, and about the weather. "I've been thinking about moving back," my father said, spearing a slice of marinated beef with his chopsticks. "Your mother's old place is too big for just me." I nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "That makes sense. You should do what feels right." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the question in his eyes. But he didn't ask. He knew better than to dig up old wounds. Instead, he simply said, "I've missed this, us, just talking like this." "Me too," I admitted, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the spicy food. When the bill came, my father insisted on paying. I let him. It was his way of making amends, and I figured I owed him that much. We stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cool night air a refreshing change from the heat of the grill. "Walk you home," he offered, zipping up his jacket against the chill. I shook my head. "No need, it's just down the street." He nodded, understanding. We stood there for a moment, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us. Then he stepped forward, pulled me into a hug. I stiffened at first, then relaxed into it. His shoulders were broader than I remembered, his scent familiar and comforting. "Good night, Min," he said, pulling away. "I'll see you soon." I watched him walk away, his figure fading into the night before turning towards my own apartment. The phone in my pocket remained silent, a welcome change from the constant buzz of notifications. I was content with that silence now, with this quiet life. The train pulled in as I reached the station, its familiar screech echoing through the night. As I stepped onto the platform, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, and that was okay. I sat on my apartment's kitchen floor, the cool linoleum familiar against my palms as I leaned back. The bedside lamp in the living room cast a soft glow, just enough to see by without needing the harsh fluorescence overhead. The window was cracked open, letting in the faint hum of the city below and the occasional waft of late summer air. 12 weeks ago, I'd sat here with a spoon bent in my hand and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. The system had been alive then, active, pulsing with notifications and stat gains. Now it was ambient, quiet, a constant presence, but no longer demanding my attention. I picked up the phone from where it lay on the counter beside me. No new notifications blinked across the screen. I smiled, a small quirk of the lips that felt like an old habit. The silence was unfamiliar, comfortable in its own way. I sat there for a while, letting the quiet settle around me like dust after a storm. And that was okay. The phone did not buzz. For the first time in 3 months, I was looking forward to nothing happening. It was enough.